of a full-time 5-day week opening of the schools in the Monona Grove School District in the fall of 2020. It is very important for the mental health of the students to return to a normal school schedule. Also, in class, one-on-one instruction is much more effective for the rote learning skills that young people need to be functional adults. Sporadic burning of learning pathways does not develop a person's mind properly. It is also essential to the community at large that the school take the lead on providing a predictable full-time schedule for the parents and their employees to count on. Each school district is dependent on a solid tax base for funding. Disrupting the parents' ability to support the financial needs of the district is losing scenario. I encourage the MG School Board to take the lead and contact the Wisconsin DPI superintendent for a full-time 5-day week opening of the schools statewide. Hiding behind the mandate of others is not the mark of true leadership for the community and students you are elected to serve. Thank you, Richard. Would a board member like to read the second one?
I'll be happy to read it. Let me just pull it up.
Thank you.
This is from Amelia Spates. What's the address? Apologize.
4209 Winnequa.
Thank you. The letter is as follows. Thank you for taking time to read this comment and listen to it thoughtfully. Thank you for discussing school resource officers at MG at tonight's July 6th meeting. My name is Amelia Spade and I'm a Monona resident and proud alum of Monona Grove, class of 2013. However, in my time through the MG school district, I felt steeped in the prejudices and long ignored violences our community perpetrates against people of color through accumulated acts of negligence and ignorance, all the way up to true hate crimes and the dismissed but not dismantled hate-based organizations in our community. I felt small against big problems, and I still do. However, I now know I can listen to the leadership of people who experience these things firsthand and advocate for substantial change. I hope that our cities and our district can start having honest, open, and action-based conversations about how to provide true equity of experience to all students by listening to all students. This includes, and is not limited to, the removal of school resource officers from Monona Grove schools. I understand that the world is scary and many of us feel that the cops protect us. However, young people of color in Madison, Monona, Cottage Grove, and beyond are telling us the cops do not make them feel safe. We have an obligation to listen to those who are disproportionately affected by police violence and begin to shift our society toward a better, more just experience. It is not about how good a cop is. It is about how the badge, the gun, the ability to cite children for petty offenses and begin to give them a record before, or and sometimes in lieu of, a diploma shifts schools from being places of openness, growth, and safety to places of fear and an endless cycle of frustration and fear. There is a reason that large, well-respected institutions like the ACLU and NAACP have been calling for an end to police officers in schools and the school to prison pipeline. Here are some resources compiled by the YWCA Madison, and then she provides a couple links in the letter. For more information about the history and future of police in schools in the US, I recommend that We Came to Learn, Call to Action, and another link is provided. Here is a quote from We Came to Learn introduction. The over-policed school atmosphere can initiate rather than mitigate misbehavior by increasing anxiety, alienating students, creating a sense of mistrust between peers, and forming adversarial relationships with school officials. Every dollar spent on police, metal detectors, and surveillance cameras is a dollar that could instead be invested in teachers, guidance counselors, and health professionals that support, not criminalize children. We all deserve to learn and grow, to make mistakes and shift our worldview at school without the threat of violence. Children especially. Young people across our country and in our cities are telling you that cops in schools make their learning experience violent because of the legacy and absolute unquestioned authority that policing carries. As managers of the school district budget and as those tasked with public oversight of how schools operate, I challenge you. Will you do everything you can to make sure schools are places of justice and growth? Will you reimagine school safety without the police today? Thank you, Amelia Spake.
Okay. All right. Thank you for the public appearances. Moving on to consent agenda. May I
I move
have,
approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
all in favor? Any discussion?
Is,
Andrew,
are you gonna do
the
a roll call?
count virtually, we really need the roll call.
Yeah, we needed the roll
Just
call.
as easier.
Because I can't see everybody, yeah.
It's a vote,
Yeah.
right?
Okay. So that no discussion, roll call vote. Andrew, aye. Peter? Susan Manning,
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Susan Fox,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
ayes have it, motion carries. Move now to recognitions.
We don't have any formal recognitions with school being out right now, other than we do have a lot of staff, in particular administrators, that are working extremely hard this summer. You're going to hear a little bit of the work that we've been doing coming up later, but that's what we have for this evening.
All right, thank you, Dan. Is there any correspondence, Dan?
None.
Okay, moving on to,
So at some point, are we gonna, there was a letter written to the board, and we don't have to do it here. But I'm just gonna request that we get a copy of that correspondence.
Can I ask what letter you're referring to?
yes,
I don't know what,
Dan, that was the one I asked you about. To let me know when you,
About an email?
yes. You can just let Andrew know which one it is,
Well,
and I can send that to him too. I don't have my email open right now.
okay. All right, we'll move to special reports. First item will be the school perceptions community survey results.
okay, so you may recall the last workshop, we're together and working on a community survey that's been out, these last 2 months. And so with us this evening, it's Bill Foster to share the results of our survey. I'll turn it over to you, Bill.
All right, thank you. And let me try to share my screen here, see if this works. All right, can everybody see something that says Monona Grove School District on it?
Yes.
Yep.
All right, technology is great when it works. All right, so again, I'm Bill Foster, and welcome the other Fosters in the crew today. It's good to see you. And my job tonight is to take you through the community survey. So it looked like this, and it went out actually in June. The deadline was June 29th, and we had 2,815 responses. Actually, we're still getting a few in, and I look back in the 2018 survey we did for the district. We've had over 1,000 responses more in this survey than we did in 2018. So I'm not sure if that means either June or pandemics are good for increasing survey response rate, but in any event, it was phenomenal. Right now, we're in excess of 30%, and from a statistical standpoint, we've got a margin of error plus or minus 1.8%. So it's not going to get much better than this. We've got very, 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 very good data in terms of response rate. So who took our survey? First slide was a demographic slide having to do with age. When I look at this slide, I always look at the far right because I want to make sure our seniors are well represented. And we were at 22% of our folks that took the survey were 65 and older, which is a little bit higher than actually the 2010 census. We don't have 2020 census yet. But typically when it comes to voting, seniors will be turning out at a higher rate than the 18 18 to 29 year old. So this is very good. Do you live in the Monona Grove School District? And actually this a little 11% kind of, or the 1% slid over, that was 1% that weren't sure where they live. It's an anonymous survey, so we don't know who those folks are, but we had 87% of our sample that were in the district and 12% that were not, which raises the question, who are those people taking our survey that don't live in our district? And that really comes from two areas primarily. One is staff. So we did have all staff participate, and we also asked parents who choose to open enroll their children into the district to take the survey, but those folks will be removed from the funding support question. So that's why that question was there, because they're not going to be able to vote on a potential operating referendum. In which city or township do you reside? So we had almost half of our sample were from the city of Monona, with a 30% from the village of Cottage Grove, 16% from the town, and then of course the other folks were folks who probably don't live in the district or live on the border. So we had 376 folks that actually work in the district take the survey, or 13%. We had 1,298 parents take the survey, or almost half of our respondent group. And then when we put this report together, it's always, usually when you look at the report, you never have the survey with you, the actual survey. So what I did when we created the report was we put the actual background information that was in the survey into the report, so you have access to that. So it was important to explain the difference between the operational referendum that's being proposed in comparison to the capital referendum that the voters supported back in 2018. We then shifted to the challenge facing the district, which was really threefold. Actually, and we developed the options. So there was our deficit of 3.1 over the next 4 years, and then we've got another need potentially of funding the teachers to bring them up to or in alignment with other Dane County districts, and then there's other expenses that are showing up as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic and a forecasted budget deficit from the state that will likely trickle down to the district and really all districts in the state. So then we get to the options, and again, the information that was provided in the survey. Option one was the 3.1 and the 2.6, the 4 million and the 4.7 million to fully fund all. So those are the 5 options that were tested. And then we get to a very colorful chart. Let me explain how this works. So all residents, let's look at the bottom of this. If we look at the bottom row, all residents, 28% of the folks who took the survey who live in the district, again, all residents, would support a $4.7 million referendum that would have a tax impact of $83 per $100,000 of home value. The logic is that if a person would support 4.7 million, it's very likely they would support 4 million. So we kind of added to that. And then we drew a red dotted line when we crossed the 50%, because we know we need to get at least 50% of the voters responding affirmative in order to pass any referendum. And you can see for all residents, we're into the 3.1 million dollar referendum. But the problem with our data is we're overrepresented with staff and overrepresented with parents. So to remove any bias, what we need to do is we need to look at each of the 3 subgroups separately. So if we move up to the staff, we can see the staff would support a $4 million operating referendum. The parents would support a $4 million operating referendum, but the staff represents less than 1% of our community. The parents represent about 25% of our community, and the majority of the voters in the Monona Grove School District land in that top row because the majority, probably 75%, don't work in the district and don't have a child attending the district. So as the board looks at this slide, you want to put much more weighting on this top group because, again, they're the majority of the voters. So we see that we've got 20% of the non-residents that would support 4.7, another 19% that would support 4 million, And then we've got another 20% that would support the 3.1. So clearly that group would be at the 3.1, and the parents and staff, they'd go up to 4 million. So let me just pause and answer questions on this chart to make sure everybody understands how to interpret that.
If anybody got questions, type in the chat so I can call you out because I don't see everybody on the screen here. Did anyone have any questions?
Good. Okay. So then we went on, and if not knowing exactly how this would turn out, the other data that we needed to collect for the district was what we call cost-cutting options. So if funding cuts are needed, where do the voters of the district want us to go? So we identified several projects, including class sizes, reducing elective course offerings, reducing athletics and other activities, cutting curriculum, technology, and student support staff. So those are kind of the potential cuts that not only your district, but really all districts would have to look towards. Then we asked, please respond to the following. So people could say, yes, we should cut this. If everybody would have said yes, it'd be a 10. If everybody would have said no, it was a 1. We then calculated a simple average and sorted based on the non-parent, non-staff column. So this far right column is what we sorted on. And you can see for really almost every item, there's a couple exceptions that are switched, but generally speaking, the priorities are the same across the board for staff, parents, and non-parents, with the highest one, and one that apparently people view as maybe where a bit much money is being spent, is in the area of curriculum and or textbook updates. So that's one area where the board could look. And really after that, we get down below 5, and one could argue that these are things that people don't want you to do, but in relative order, if you had to, you could look at reducing athletics and other activities. It should be noted, though, that if you didn't buy any textbooks or curriculum and didn't have any athletics, you wouldn't be able to close a $3 to $4 million budget gap. So, this is not going to do it. Then we get into class size at the middle high school. Technology was 4th in terms of cutting that. Elementary class sizes were 5th. Decreasing middle and high school course offerings was 2nd to last, and the least favorite item that we arguably should not consider would be reducing funding support for support staff to save money. So again, there's pretty good correlation between all subgroups in terms of cost-cutting options. And I think that was the end of the data. So again, questions on that?
Oh, I see. Okay.
Anybody from the board got a question, anything?
I want to, Andrew?
Oh, I can't see you. I didn't see if your hand
Andrew,
was
it's Peter.
Okay, go ahead, Peter.
I just wanted to say thank you for reporting this in a very clear fashion. I think it was a well-designed survey, and I think the results are pretty clear. So thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
And I think your report, I don't have any questions because your report's very clear.
Yeah, that's outstanding. Thank you so much. Susan Manning?
I knew this, we kind of knew when we were doing this, but I do want to mention to the board that we received, at least I did, a significant amount of angst about the list of things to be cut, specifically the funding for student support staff versus no other staff. So I just, even though that was the least favorite, that's really nice, but that was an irritant to some members of the community, that was included and you didn't talk about any other staff. So I tend to lose some credibility with that one and the answer.
Andrew?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, except I think this bears that out. I mean, it was the least favorite thing. They're saying, am I reading that right? That's the last thing that anybody wants to see any cuts in. So it bears out the people who talk to you is borne out by this survey. So I'm glad we asked it because it got the
result we wanted.
It got, well, the result, that we did hear I only got one contact about that, but yeah, it showed that people care about that. So that's a good thing.
Andrew,
Go ahead, Elizabeth.
just kind of on that same vein, I think it's a good lesson learned kind of for us as a board as we're thinking about the importance of language and how language matters, right? And like we could have, like in hindsight, right, is obviously an unintentional harm, but there was a harm. So we should acknowledge that and think about when we're thinking about wording things, being really mindful of whether or not we're talking about a category of services or like people who deliver those services. And so adding the word staff, I think, kind of brings this idea of like people in a different way, where with some of the other ones, right, if you're reducing athletics, like obviously that impacts people, class sizes impacts people, it impacts teachers, but you have to make a logical leap there, which is a little bit different than that bottom one. So, I mean, I think that was clearly not intentional to have a negative impact on our staff or on our community, but certainly I think did. And so I think that's a good lesson learned for us moving forward about us being really mindful about kind of some of the language that we're using. And then just for you, Bill, just as like an FYI, because we had staff on there, it did cause some hurt feelings, appropriately so, amongst our staff and some of our community members.
Yep.
Susan Fox.
Although that certainly also goes to communication. And once they were able to have a meeting and talk about it and understand it, so that to me,
Definitely.
the lesson was less in the wording and in the pre-communication before it went out. So we look at it that way as well. Because I think we had to be clear about it. I'm not sure there would have been a better way to be clear about that particular thing. So, yeah.
Susan Manning.
I think Elizabeth made an excellent point. And again, some of the votes in there were garnered. Understanding it tells us that our staff doesn't want to do this, but some of those are non-resident staff. So Bill, did you take out all non-residents before compiling this data?
Yes.
Okay, so these are all residents.
Right.
Okay, even if they're staff. Okay.
Yep. Because it really goes to funding and ultimately a referendum, and so therefore, if they can't vote, they didn't get a vote, I guess, in this particular. We could run it for everyone, but in this particular case, it was resident only.
All right. Any more questions? None. Thank you, Bill, for that
Thank you.
report there. Okay.
Good.
I'll wait till you move the screen off.
All right.
There we go.
Okay.
All righty. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Have a good night.
You too. All right. Moving to ad hoc school naming committee recommendations.
Okay, I'll go ahead and kick us off here. So first of all, I wanted to remind the board that we had a naming committee that was the board developed a charge and scope, which I've attached as a reminder for the work that was done. We've met, over several months, and with the committee members, we had community members, parents, staff, we had a student, and then Katie and I served as, I guess you would say, ex officio. We were more facilitators for the group. And then tonight with us, we have two of our committee members, Kate Oliver and Jason Johnson, that will be available to answer any questions of board members about the recommendations and so on. And of course, we also had 2 board members that participated as committee members, Lorraine Gage and Eric Carr. And so with that, you have the final recommendation on your attachment of board docs, and Katie is going to walk us through.
My internet went out, so I'm going to assume that you just turned it over to me, even though I didn't hear anything. So,
Yes.
okay.
Should have did like this and pointed right there.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to run through the report really quickly. You heard Dan kind of give the rundown. The only thing I would add is that we did survey twice with the committee. That was a choice that they made to survey the entire community, both communities. We sent it to families and to really any stakeholder list that we had email addresses for. And then we also had pre-COVID, we had postcards available in public places too that people could write in. So kind of run down through these recommendations here for you. The committee members, any board members who were there, please feel free to just jump in and fill in the gaps. And then of course, any questions you have, we can probably wait until the end, probably get through everything before we start going through that. So grade level identifiers, this was something that the committee took on early. They wanted to hear about this and really wanted to hear from how the community felt about this. You can see that there was very strong support in the community survey. 82.6% of respondents said yes, they did want to have these identifiers included in our school names. So the school naming committee did unanimously recommend that the board add grade level identifiers to all the schools in the district. In the school names under recommendation 2, we do include what those identifiers you might want to consider. Recommendation 2, school names. Again, I'm going to run through this really quickly. If you have questions, let's, Andrew, I'll defer to you, but I think probably we should wait until we're done. The committee did look at all the names in the district. Once we looked at those identifiers, I think the committee felt strongly that we needed to consider every name of every school. So let's start with Glacial Drumlin. Monona Grove High School, there was no recommended change. Glacial Drumlin School. The new recommended name is Monona Grove Middle School. And here's the thinking behind it. When the school opened, it held Cottage Grove 5th and 6th graders, as well as 7th and 8th graders from Monona and Cottage Grove. When the new school opens, the school will be a true middle school. As middle school is the first time students from our communities are combined, a name that reflects and welcomes both communities will have a unifying effect. This name will also act as a bridge for students and families as they prepare to enter Monona Grove High School. The committee unanimously recommended this change. Next, we move on to the new school, and the recommended name is Granite Ridge Intermediate School. This name is a nod to our state rock, granite, and the elevations of the new school site. In the community survey, Granite Ridge received the highest vote tally at 27.3%. And while the committee reached consensus on the recommendation, it was not unanimous. And there's more information in a separate section below under other names considered. Cottage Grove School, recommended name Woodside Primary School. The majority of survey respondents supported changing the name of Cottage Grove School. And given the amount of confusion from residents and visitors about this name, the committee unanimously recommends changing the name. Given the proximity to the district's school forest, the committee unanimously recommends Woodside Primary School. And for Taylor Prairie School, the recommended new name is Taylor Prairie Early Learning Center. Committee unanimously recommends this name. Recommendation number 3. You may have noticed that this was not included in the section above. Winnequa School. The committee heard a compelling presentation regarding the history of the word Winnequa. Presentation included detailed research and productive discussion on the racist origins of the word Winnequa. Though there is no direct evidence of the word's creation, authorship, or meaning, several published historical books found at the Monona Public Library explain it in the same way, a portmanteau of the words Winnebago and squaw. There are many sources explaining the origins of the word. Squaw is not a native word. It was created by colonizers, and the word Winnebago is not the way that Indigenous people living in this area refer to themselves. In addition, the committee believes the mission of the Monona Grove School District and its focus on equity and social responsibility calls the board to action on the name change. Despite decades of educational reform and federal mandates, the United States continues to see growing inequities among students. The administration and staff of the Monona Grove School District have been working for several years to disrupt the systems in place that allow these inequities to persist in our schools. The committee calls upon the school board to address it immediately and unanimously recommends that the school board change the name to Monona Elementary School. Should the school board not take this recommendation, the committee unanimously recommends the board immediately create another ad hoc committee to do further review. We can go through the names and or notes and discussions too, if you'd like. These are some of the conversations that the committee had. I'll say we met, I think, 7 or 8 times, and they were always very meaty, very heavy discussions. And so you can see here, this is a very, very brief synopsis of some of the things that we talked about as a committee, including naming by municipality, so that every school would be, for example, Cottage Grove Early Learning Center, Cottage Grove Primary, Cottage Grove Intermediate. The committee did not reach consensus on this option being a recommendation, but many members did feel it would be simpler, would unify the communities and the district, and would clarify questions about who attends which schools. The survey asking, other names considered, the survey asking the community to weigh in had 1,200 responses. It was, not like our community survey on the funding that we just heard from Bill, but still pretty good. The committee understands the school board may diverge from the committee's recommendation and wanted to offer you some of the same information that they tackled. Glacial Drumlin Intermediate School. The committee discussed transferring the name from Glacial Drumlin School to the new school. The history of the Glacial Drumlin and Cottage Grove is significant. And as the 5th grade moves out of the building, out of the middle school and into the new school, the name would follow them and create connection for the community. The committee did not reach consensus on this. Several committee members felt it would honor the existing name and significance of the Drumlin. Other members felt that transferring a name would diminish the excitement of opening a new school and could hamper efforts to create a unique culture. And then Sandhill Ridge Intermediate School. Sandhill cranes are a common and welcome sight in Cottage Grove and in that area of the village in particular. The use of the word ridge, similar to in the recommendation, is a nod to the topography of the site, but also would serve to distinguish the school from another school with a related name in the county. Those are the highlights. I guess first I'll ask if Kate and Jason or Laureen or Eric have any gaps that they'd like to fill in, and then we can open it up for questions.
Katie, the Winnequa school was not on the survey, right?
Correct.
For the public.
Correct.
Seeing that there's no questions or anything, Lorraine, Kate, or anybody, did you guys have anything to add to it? Judging by the side, oh, there we go, Susan Manning. You're muted. You're muted.
Still didn't hear you. Susan?
Susan, you're muted. You're still on mute.
You need to unmute yourself.
Telling me, look who's telling me to unmute. I love it. Yeah, it's because I had to do it a different way. Sorry. I had a couple questions. I know. One was, I thought the committee was just an incredible, amazing mix of parents and staff. I did state a concern to both Dan and Andrew at the beginning that the committee seemed to kind of miss a little bit of the historic element. So I'm going to ask, because I didn't hear it in the meetings. Was there any discussion of the history of a name? So for instance, the history of Cottage Grove School and the name of that school goes back to 1910. And the community, a lot of that community is very aware of that. And there are still people that we know that went to school in the original schoolhouse. So my first question is, was there discussion of the history and the years of how long the name has been prior to making the recommendation?
Kate is on mute.
Is Jason still there? Jason's
Sorry.
there.
Sorry.
Oh, Jason's on mute.
We actually did talk about this during one of our very first meetings and kind of bemoaned the fact that we didn't have someone who had a greater grasp of the history of naming all of the schools in the district, including how Glacial Drumlin was decided and things like that. So I'll be honest, Susan, I had not been aware that the Cottage Grove School had been a name that's been carried for well over 100 years. I think a lot of the discussion is specifically around Cottage Grove School was that as the schools in Cottage Grove have expanded and there have become so many more elementary, primary schools, that it has been very confusing for people who aren't a historical part of our district. People who are traveling here or new families don't understand how Cottage Grove School is different from Taylor Prairie, is different from GDS, et cetera. So we wanted to try to provide that clarity. I don't know, Jason, if you have anything to add.
No, I think you did a great job. Myself and others, though, were more focused on creating a unifying theme in the district, and that took a little more priority than the history of the names, because with my family being in the district 4 generations, a constant theme of the district has been Monona versus Cottage Grove, and so a priority for several committee members was how do we unify the district, or how do we unify these names so it's clear and consistent for all members, and it's welcoming for all members of the community. So that was, I guess I would say that was more of a priority for me than the history of the name.
Well, it was also interesting that I received information that about when Taylor Prairie was built, its original name was to be Parkview School, given its location next to the park. Additionally, Cottage Grove School was to become Forest View School for the same reason. Isn't that interesting? All went smoothly until the Cottage Grove Historical Society pointed out that Cottage Grove School has been named for such a long time and was recognized by everyone as the school. To quite a number of people, this name change might change its identity. And then the other issue that I received input on that I was just going to ask if there had been discussion about, I didn't hear discussion during the meetings of the configurations of the building. So for instance, we can call Glacial Drumlin Middle School or Monona Grove Middle School. That middle school may, as the population grows, may rehouse 5th graders. So at one point we had 3-5 at Nichols. Then we had 3-5 at Winnequa School with 6-8. And Susan may be able to, because she was actually teaching in the high school and then in the middle school at that time. But we actually had 3-5 students in the building with the middle school students. And part of that is the growth issues. So I didn't notice discussion about that.
So at our very first meeting when we convened and were kind of given our charge, and Dan reviewed a lot of the information for us about how the schools were going to be laid out, I'll be honest, and Jason, you can certainly express your opinion. I was under the impression that for now, at least, and we certainly can't predict the future, but that the grade level configurations at the various schools was kind of the anticipated plan for now. Now, again, we don't know what's going to be in the future. And I think our charge was dealing with the now, not trying to anticipate that 5, 10, maybe 2 years from now, we would need to change those configurations. But I think most of the committee members, to my understanding, were under the impression that we were going with what the configurations were presented to us. And I think those are the same ones that were presented to the community in previous referendums. Jason, I don't know if you have anything to add.
No, I agree. It was discussed at the first meeting, and Dan talked to us a little bit about the long-term planning of school buildings in Cottage Grove, and said that these buildings would be static, but it is possible that they could change populations, but it's not in the plans as of right now. So we were just trying to make our decisions based off the information that we knew at the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Kate and Jason.
Susan Fox.
I appreciate you being here.
I'd also like to thank the committee. I listened into a few meetings, mostly toward the end, maybe 4. And I was really impressed with the thoughtfulness of the group and how seriously you all took it and really hammered through a lot of these issues. However, having said that, and I think there was a little bit of discussion at the end, someone raised the issue of this district changes its configuration fairly often. So do you really want to go there? I'm not sure that these would be an issue. I know that when the board, we had done a survey back when, before the referendum for the new school, and one of the surveys was about grade configuration, and the board was a little torn about it. I mean, the issue is that we've never had any division by residents. It's always been Cottage Grove Elementary and then Taylor Prairie and Cottage Grove. So the Cottage Grove community has never had to divide among 2 elementary schools. And that's a hard thing to start. But there was a lot of concern. I still have a lot of personal concern about having a school that just has 4K and K in it, and then just 1 and 2 and another one. The other preference or the other possibility would have been to move 4K2 in each of those buildings. But we decided, again, this was not the time to split the community. So for the foreseeable future, and assuming that works okay and staff feel like it's working and parents don't get tired of driving to 3 different elementary schools, whatever, it may stay that way until if the community really grows. And I think then we're talking a long way off. And another elementary school is built at that time, that issue would have to be addressed. But I think, putting the grade identifiers, I don't see it as real problematic. I'm not sure it's totally clear, but that's not a bad thing, because then if you do switch a couple of grades, it doesn't make that much difference. I was surprised to see Monona Grove Middle School on here as a recommendation, because I really hadn't heard the committee talk about that much at the end, but I know at the end you finally did. I would personally, as a board member, want to revisit. I know that when Glacial Drumlin was named, that was a very robust process. The board was not involved. It was all staff, and that was right as I was on my way out. So I was only peripherally paying attention to it as a teacher, I mean. But parents, students, teachers all had a lot of input into that name. A lot went into it. And I guess I'd want to know, I would probably want more input from the community on what they thought about changing that name, because I'm just not sure how that would be received. And there's not a real reason to change it. It could easily be called Glacial Drumlin Middle School now. So I would personally want more input on that. Similarly, Cottage Grove School, I found that very interesting to learn. Built the board that was going to for it called Cottage Grove School Forest View, because I was wondered myself, why didn't they change that name back when Taylor Prairie was built? Because it seems like it would have made sense. And I heard that, yeah, that Susan mentioned the concern raised by the Historical Society. I heard that it was very robust concern. They were very concerned. So again, I would just want input on that, just as one more point to consider, because I think these things, they have a pretty active Historical Society, and people have been in that district a long time. And, you know, when you make a change like that, I just think you have to hear from the various stakeholders. So I personally would want to hear more about that. I kind of like the name for the new school. I was kind of actually, as I was listening, and somebody, when that first came up, granted, I thought, oh, that's cool. I like that, because it's a little different than the State Rock. I like it. Winnequa, similarly, I can see how that'd be a hard thing to survey on, but I think, you know, we'd have to have community input. And I guess I would personally want to hear input from Ho-Chunk women. It was named specifically in reference to a specific Ho-Chunk woman who lived on that land, had common law marriage to a man, Abe Wood, who, when he moved out of the community, moved up to the Baraboo area. She and a daughter stayed for a while, and they eventually moved on, and she ended up, I think, in Nebraska. But that's where it came from. It was Strawberry Point for a long time. It was the Indian Village for a while. It was the center of the Ho-Chunk village at that time. And then it did become, at least the thinking is, and most of the resources, the ones they quoted here, if you look up on Wikipedia, it says the same thing, that the Winnequa, it was the place where the Winnebago squaw lives, that's where where the name came from. And at that time, it was not a pejorative word. It has changed in the Urban Dictionary. The city council, the Dane County, recently changed the name of Squaw Bay. And I understood that the Ho-Chunk women would have liked to have had more input on that than they did. So I would like to hear from them about this, because it's sort of an interesting historic story. How that name came about. And, you know, that's something I'd for sure want more input and more time to think about before making that change so quickly. There are a lot of Native American based sounding names in Monona and in really the whole state of Wisconsin. Some of them actually have roots like that. Some of them are just syllables that are made up. We have in Monona Panther Trail, where there was a panther-shaped Indian mound. So some of them relate to mounds. There's a lot of history here, and you know, I think you want to honor that. At the same time, I know it's like everything. There are questions being raised about appropriation, but there are a lot of, like the street I live on, Toniawatha, as I understand it, is just syllables. I actually have a book on Wisconsin Indian names, and it's a substantial book. And it says that a lot of the names don't really have a meaning. Monona, I think, did have a meaning. Now I can't remember what it was. Serene water, something like that. So it's just interesting. There's a lot involved there, and I'd like to hear more about that as well. So to me, as I look at this, I guess the only pretty easy thing I see is if we go with the identifiers, Taylor Prairie Early Learning Center, I think that makes sense. There are a lot of just daycare centers that are called early learning centers, but I think if you've got 3 elementaries, it would become clear what that is. And as I said, I'm good with the proposed name for the new elementary school. Those are about the only 2 I'd be ready to make a decision on personally, though. I think Jason, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to respond to Susan. So, like I said, as far as the community is concerned, though, it was considered a moral imperative for us to change the Winnequa name of the school because of staff reaction. I contacted the Ho-Chunk Cultural Resource Center and spoke with them about the name. Like I said, a lot of input went in, and we talked a lot about it. So we're really hoping that you take this, and students are going through at the Monona Grove School District. We want to make sure that we're being authentic in what we say and what we do. And so just please consider that when you're considering name Winnequa.
I do think that's,
Eric?
and that's certainly something to think about. Okay, sorry.
Eric?
Well, I was just going to say, remind everyone that when Katie went over everything, that's part of the reason when we had this discussion, we put the Winnequa thing kind of on the side because we thought it was important to get to the names of all the other schools because we anticipated, or there were, at least I brought up some questions about that there may be some more information that's needed about the name change of Winnequa. Correct, Katie, right? Is that when you read that, that's what you said?
I don't know that I would want to put any reasoning behind the separation, except to say that it's the rationale was quite a bit longer, and the committee recognized that it wasn't simple. That this had more impact behind it, perhaps.
Yeah, well said. That's what I would agree. So, but yeah, so I think that, you know, it was anticipated, Susan, that some of those things might come up and the board would need some more information. So, I was one of the people that brought that up too, that there may be some concerns with that. So I'm not saying, you know, how I would vote or anything. It's just with the recommendation that did come up. So.
Peter?
Yeah, I think it's probably, although I think we need to do a little more work on this, time to think about changing the name of Winnequa. I do object to the Monona Elementary School for precisely the same reasons that we want to change the Cottage Grove School name. That seems to be discordant to say we want to change that, but then name another one after the municipality. It just doesn't seem to work for me. And I hope we can come up with a more creative name that honors something in the community that we wish to memorialize a little better. I want to ask who the geologist who keeps naming our schools and new schools in Cottage Grove after geological features like glacial drumlins and Granite Ridge. Seems to be a theme there. I'd also comment on the Cottage Grove Elementary issue. Yeah, there's, I mean, that name predates the Monona Grove School District. And so, yes, there's a lot of history there, but there may also be some reason that we want to update it because this historical name is you know, comes from before there was the Monona Grove School District and before it was part of that. So I think that's also something that we want to consider. Thanks.
Susan Fox and then Lorraine.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that at all. When I said input, that doesn't mean, I just want to hear what people think. And because I noticed in your survey, you did have a historian from Cottage Grove who said he or she would be willing to, knows a lot about the history and would be more than happy to talk to any of us about it. And I'm assuming no one contacted that person, but there's an email here, so I might take it on myself to just reach out and see, just because I don't, I think if you don't ask people for their opinions and then you don't, you know, I just think, I just don't want to shut people out, I guess. So that's what I meant when I said, look at the history and think about it. And as far as the name for Winnequa, yeah, if we do decide to make that change, I'd hope we might even consider another sort of Ho-Chunk related name, because I think the history part in that sense is a good one. I totally agree with you with Monona Grove Elementary, Cottage Grove Elementary. I mean, that whole, yeah, I do agree with that part.
Lorraine?
It might be, my response is just to Peter. Just to reiterate what Jason and Katie said, the logic behind the Monona Grove Middle School is just to unify the two communities, so.
Okay, Katie?
I just want to clarify to make sure that maybe I'm misunderstanding your comments, Susan Fox, that the survey did include a specific question about renaming Cottage Grove School. That had, it's listed on the report here. Hang on, let me pull it back up. I guess we didn't list the percentage there. It did have a positive support to
Right.
read that school.
Right.
So I just want to make sure that you knew that was a question, not saying whether, and I'll be honest, it didn't include context to say, you know, the name has been around since 1910 or anything like that, or that it predated the school district. But the committee did ask that question on a survey, and it did, more people said yes than said no.
Yeah, I did note that on the survey. I thought, and so I saw that. I just, when I saw this person's comment that they'd be happy to talk to us, I thought,
yeah,
I just, again, I just think it's a significant change for the community. And even if most people support it, I just think it's important to talk to all the stakeholders in the same way of changing Winnequa and explain why we're doing it. And just give them a chance to have some input on it. And they may say, yeah, that was our feeling back when Taylor Prairie was built. Now we think, yeah, it's time to change. I mean, when you have 3 elementary schools, that's different even than having 2. So I think that makes some sense.
Peter?
I would say it seems like this is a uniquely advantageous time to get responses to surveys. When I look at the numbers, both the the budget survey and the naming survey. So maybe we should take advantage of this moment while we have it.
People have nothing to do.
Exactly.
Or have less to do, I should say. A lot of people have a lot to do. I shouldn't say that.
Susan Manning?
Well, I think the other thing, and it'll be nice to maybe have Jill at some point assist us with this, but to move in and change the names of 3 schools, and several people, I mean, it's a significant number, not just several, said that changing the name of Glacial Drumlin and then naming the new school Glacial Drumlin would be incredibly confusing for the people who have kids kind of 1st grade through 7th grade right now, much less people coming into the district. So I think that confusion issue could be a factor. And these are things that people brought to me. These are not necessarily my opinions. And the other thing, it's a major factor here that as a board, we have to seriously consider is that we're going to referendum, and we just got these numbers. A significant number of the individuals who responded are non-parent residents, and then parent residents. So if this movement at this particular time is considered disruptive to the families, particularly after COVID and kids coming back to school. Oh, by the way, you were going to this school before, but now it's called this school. It's just for the mental health aspects of the kids and the staff and everyone involved. I think we really need as a board to prioritize what we're going to do. And I think we need to pick the name of a new school. And if the board's choice is Glacial Drumlin and they want to do that, you need to consider the impact on the kids who are coming back to Glacial Drumlin. It needs to be a consideration as we move forward. Thanks.
Elizabeth?
So I do not have any ability to speak authoritatively on any of like the deep historical roots of any of these particular names. So I am not going to do that, but I do appreciate the discussion. I've learned a lot today. I can talk a little bit from the other side of it though, as kind of a newer, relatively newer member of the community, kind of in the geological time space we've been discussing today. And something I really appreciate is the addition of grade level identifiers. I do think it brings, regardless of kind of what comes before that, and I think that there's room for discussion around kind of what we want to do there for sure. And I appreciate the comments around, particularly around Winnequa and making sure that we're digging deeper there, and Cottage Grove School as well, given the history. but I do agree that like not having grade level identifiers is like another cognitive lift on families and people who are looking at our district to try to figure out like what is happening there. And so if we can just use that language as a signifier, I think that that's a net benefit overall. And while I agree with you, Susan, on prioritizing, I'm not sure that I agree that I would take the leap that there would be a significant like mental health burden around a name change of a school. I think a lot of that comes down to like messaging and communication and, you know, how people sort of respond to it and parents getting excited about it or whatever else. So I think a lot of that is sort of in the packaging and less so around like the actual movement itself. Although I do think there's a lot of other mental health concerns that we need to be talking about and addressing as it relates to reopening for sure.
And you sent us great information on that, Elizabeth, but I actually, because I don't have that expertise, went to an individual who is highly recognized in this community as the director of the child psych facility. And I said, how do you think that would affect the kids right now? Just even, let's say we really need to do it. And she said, it's a change. And the more change you make as they come back, the more effect you'll see. So again, it's difficult because we're going to make changes. So.
Okay. Well, I guess McKinney Intermediate is going to be out of the question. So.
Sorry, McKinney, no legacy for you here.
That was the one piece of advice I got. The first person I asked who said, do not name it after a person. So sorry.
That was the advice I got as well.
All right.
In writing.
So, okay. Do you got any more further discussion? All right. Seeing none.
Will this be, do you need guidance? Well, this is at least the name of the new school would be on the next board agenda and toward the decision possibly, or what? Because the timeline for that is by August.
Right. So my thought is that in the regular meeting in August, we'll have it as a possible action item, and you can choose to take action on any of these items that you would like. It's not imperative you make a decision on August 12th, even on the new school. But at least you can, at that point, decide, okay, as a board, which of these recommendations might you want to consider now, which ones later, which ones not at all. But we'll list as a possible action item so that you can make motions. You know, there may very well be motions to, you know, further study or whatever that might look like. But I'll try to leave it open, and I'll try to get some guidance, you know, and if you guys have thoughts to share with me about how we post that. But that's my thought going into it.
Okay.
I just felt like we needed to explain to the committee what was, not just leave them with what they heard. Okay, thanks.
All righty. All right. Thank you for all that reporting. All right. Moving to administrative reports. We get handed over to our Director of Business Service, the king himself, Jared Bruce.
Thanks, Andrew. Just two things I want to report on. The first one is our July 1st state equalization aid. So as we approved the preliminary budgets at the end of June, our June board meeting, I had estimated that we would see approximately a 1% increase in state equalization aid. The July 1st is a statutory date in which DPI needs to release the first aid estimates for school districts, which won't be finalized until October 15th. We are anticipating an increase of about $670,000, which is a 4.82% increase over last year. This doesn't give the district additional funds to allocate through our budget. What it does, it's the counterpart of what taxpayers have to burden based on the total levy. So the more money that we do receive through state equalization aid, the least amount of money that has to be passed along to our taxpayers based off of the total levy. How it works is that it's a shared cost concept. So we're getting our estimate as of July 1. However, all the schools need to report their actual expenditures for the 2019-20 school year. They'll run it through the formula and determine that. So for example, we're a school district that is negative aided. So for each dollar we spend we do lose a little bit of equalization aid due to COVID, and we've been reporting that we are obviously going to underspend our budget because there were some areas that we did not have to continue to pay. We will anticipate seeing a larger increase in our equalization. I anticipate seeing a larger increase than this 4.82%, but it will be a unique because there's going to be other school districts that are positive aided, which means that if they do spend less than what they reported, they're going to actually receive less equalization aid for next year. So for 1 year, districts are going to see some unique spikes or decreases in their state equalization aid. And like I said, this is July 1st estimate. I know business manager has updated their budgets with actuals by, at the end of the day, on June 30th and got that to DPI. So these are estimates coming from the budget report that districts submit back in December, and they use that to run our estimates. And then the second update is open enrollment. So typically this update would have been given at the June meeting, but due to COVID, our open enrollment period was extended to from the end of April to the end of May. The district actually received 210 applications for students that would like to attend this Monona Grove School District, and we did receive 72 applications to leave the district via open enrollment. I do want to note that the 210 has been fairly similar to what we've seen over the last couple of years. Part of that has been is that we've open enrollment has extended over a 3-month period for application, but they've also opened up what they call an alternative open enrollment application process, which individuals can technically apply for open enrollment continuous. There's not just a specific window, and then after that window closes, there's no opportunity. The other part that I want to point out is that the 72 applications to leave the district via open enrollment, that is an increase. Typically, we receive about 50. Most of the increases out right now are applying to virtual schools, and I think it's due to the fact, and this is just some assumptions by looking at the numbers or the applications to go to and seeing some conversations on social media. I think families are uncertain of what COVID-19 is going to do for schools in the fall. And so I think they're keeping their options open. However, also note that with open enrollments, a family can choose to, if they're attending our school district, withdraw at any time and go back to the resident district. So someone can start and attend with us for a couple of months and then withdraw and go back. We do get compensated for the days that they are here, and it would be the same concept for the individuals that leave our district. So for example, if we have individuals that are applying to a virtual school because they're unsure of what's going to happen, and they start there and then realize in second semester they want to come back, they do. But with an increase of approximately 20 open enrollment application, now that's approximately about $180,000 expense they went for the entire year that typically would not have been in the budget that we will have to budget for. And we won't really know if individuals attend because they can accept the applications, they can accept the enrollment, but they ultimately have to show up. So, and we do over the course of the years, individuals don't show up. They made their decision early on to accept, and then something else changes, and some families let us know, and some families just decide that the district obviously will figure it out when they don't show up. So those are my 2 reports.
All right. Any questions? Peter?
Just for fun, Jared, did you calculate the difference in our mill rate that the aid estimate changes?
I did not. Part of it is because I know it's going to probably change more than it has in the past, but I can tell you our mill rate would decrease somewhat tremendously from what I had presented in the preliminary budget.
Somewhat tremendously, for you.
Great.
The other question is,
that was the best, Jared.
Yeah.
The other question is, are we allowed to ask the demographics of the open enrollment out applications?
We cannot use that as a selection process. Their DPI has the application, so, and I can't recall off the top of my head what specifically is asked, but I don't think there's many demographic questions other than, male, female, and age. But
Okay. Thank you. So what you're saying is that data doesn't exist.
I don't believe it does. No.
All right. And okay. And what happens here is the DPI just reports they have received 72 out applications.
So there's an online system. So we see like name, residence, resident schools, their address, their grade. We see all that, but we don't see all the other things. And I don't even think they asked it on the application. I haven't looked at an application recently to be able to answer that question fully.
Okay. And just one question, the students who attend the, Nuestro Mundo, they would be part of that 72, right?
No, so they are considered a 66.03, so they're not part of open enrollment. Okay. They would become part of the open enrollment. The 72 is if they choose to continue in the dual language program after 5th grade, because that's the only partnership that we have is up through 5th grade. And then after that, they would have to go through the open period.
All right, thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jared. Moving on to the superintendent's report. Dan?
Okay, so this evening, just want to update the board on where we're at with our planning process. And I included a few links on there of some of our guiding, documents. And I was really, there's so much that we're involved with planning. And so I'm trying to determine what's the best way of trying to give you an update. Our thought was to give you kind of the big picture overview of all the things that we're working on, and then depending on what questions you have, what you have most interest in, we can go into as much detail as you like about any one of these. So I'll start by kicking it off with kind of the overall big picture and the process that we're working through. I did ask our administrative team to be with us tonight as well, that can ask any questions or answer any questions that you might have as well. So on the report, the links, the guiding principles we created to help guide our work, moving through the decision flow chart. I think that's really important. If you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen just briefly because that's a really important document, I think, for everyone to understand as we move through, in this planning piece. Our planning and whatever our final what we end up with the fall reopening will be very much influenced by public health, Madison-Dane County. Okay, so we know that the governor's order, the only thing that that stayed with that was the school closure through June 30th. Department of Health Services has given guidance, okay, but they have not given any orders. We do know at this point, okay, that local county public health appear to have the authority to give orders, and we have plenty of them in Dane County right now. And so we're currently on order number 8. And public health, they have representatives that they've been wonderful in working with the Dane County School District, keeping us informed, asking questions, providing guidance, so that when they put out their guidance and requirements, they're really trying to help work with us and our needs in that decision-making process. So in this decision-making flow chart, okay, if we were to go back to phase 1, that is certain, that would mean schools are closed, okay, and virtual learning is the only option for all students. Recall that we did move into phase 2. At this point, we're still in phase 2, even though recent orders have scaled back some things that you're well aware of, but we're still in that phase. We do expect very soon additional guidance specifically for schools, as far as what limitations we might have with students returning in our building. And we expect part of that to be requirements, not just guidance. And so we've been waiting. They've said that we will have it sometime after July 6th. We're at July 8th now. It could come any day, but we expect that we will get very clear guidance and some requirements about is it even possible for us to open our buildings and allow all students back. Based upon the conversations that we're having we do not expect that to be the case. We expect some sort of limitation. So we expect that the requirements that are going to come from public health will most likely limit our spacing, meaning we'll be required to have physical distancing and limiting how many students we can have in a building. And that's where that hybrid model would come if we only we can't bring back all students. A better, what we obviously are all hoping for, we'd love to be able to open up the buildings for all of our students safely. Without question, teaching, learning that would best occur face to face. That's what our teachers have been trained to do. That's what we know how to do. We want to be clear, that's what we would hopefully be able to do. But we also have to be realistic, and it's not looking very positive right now that that will happen. If we get guidance and not requirements, that will be a discussion we need to have, including, with the board about if we are left to be making local decisions. But if we get the requirements and any piece of that, obviously that's what we have, to deal with. So why don't I stop there? Does anyone have any questions on kind of that flow chart and the role of that public health plays in our decision-making process?
Yeah, Dan, I have a question. I'm just curious, you said on the timeline here. So you said timeline for Dane County Health is next week sometime?
It could be any day. They said sometime after July 6th.
So then for the process of what we want to do as a district, where does this fall on the decision of the board and administration? What is our role as a board, and what is the role of administration? And then also, in addition to that, what would be our last end date that we would have to make a decision by?
Yeah, great questions. And it's a little bit of a gray area, and that's something so I can tell you this, if we are required to have our buildings closed, there's no board action required. Obviously, we don't have a choice. Board policy actually gives me the authority to close. I would certainly not make that decision. I would certainly be in consultation with the board. You could, as a board, you can make it any decision you choose to make. Okay, I mean, you can overwrite your own policy, and so let's be clear there that the board can be as involved as you'd like to be. But as far as what is required, if we have school closure, really we only have one way of delivering instruction, and that's virtually. That doesn't require board approval. What I would hope is that we are on the same page, and we need to really communicate a lot this next month about where we're at. And I think the decision to have things partially closed, or if it's made by us, a lot of things probably don't require board approval by policy, but I certainly want to make sure I have the endorsement of the board, so I may very well be bringing some things for approval, just to confirm that this is where we're at. So I know I'm being a little bit ambiguous there because it's not real clear, but I don't want anything that are important, big decisions will not be made without board input first, either formally looking for consensus or by vote.
And I would just say to that, of course, we don't have policies for this because this is all new territory. So I would ask that you make sure that we're included in all those decisions, that we can be involved with that in the process. And what about the timeline?
Timeline, yeah. So I think the most important thing is giving certainly our parents, as much time as we can, and then just as importantly, if not more importantly, our staff in preparation. So I look at the timeline of really being the end of July as our target. We have to know what we're going to do by the end of July. So one of the things I was going to mention tonight, we can't wait till our next regular meeting on August 12th to have another board update. We're going to have to schedule a special meeting at the end of July to see where we're at. And then along with the way, we do have a couple other meetings scheduled already, some workshops and so on. If we need to add this in as an agenda item, that's certainly a real possibility also, depending on how things are evolve here in the next week or two.
Any other question? Peter?
Sorry, Dan, I'm looking at the guidelines, and I'm looking at guideline number 2 when it starts, we must do everything we can to keep our students, staff, and community physically safe. And I'm concerned about the wording, we must do everything we can, because you say that, and it's right, we can't have in-person classes at all. And maybe we do, maybe we don't. But when you say we do everything we can, I think that that's a little bit, it's an unrealistic standard. There's risk in everything every day. And I think we need to make that standard. We reduce the risk so it's understandable to, we reduce the risk. We will do everything we can to reduce the risk to acceptable or manageable levels. There's a 0.05% chance that any of us could catch the flu and die from it in any given year. And but we find that an acceptable level of risk to continue our normal lives. And I think the standard should be reducing it to an acceptable level of risk, whatever that is. But I think that the everything we can is a little bit too extreme, because I think it precludes reasonable action. If you take that literally, I think it's too strong, because it precludes reasonable activity, reasonable actions which would keep people safe, but which don't reduce the risk to zero, because you can never reduce the risk to zero. See what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely. So just to be clear, this is a kind of an internal working document that we're using to guide our decision making, but we have published it publicly. So that's,
yeah. And to be honest, when I'm looking at the university, when I'm looking at some of these things, the number I'm trying to look for is ways to reduce, ways to reach a level where the risk is essentially equivalent to the risk you would have from the annually from the flu. It's a measurable standard that we all know is acceptable. And in fact, there are things you can look at in ways you can determine how close you are to that. And it's a reasonable standard that's measurable, and we can potentially get to it.
Susan, Manny?
Actually, the going forward, if you look on the University Hospital site and you look on the Merida and St. Mary's site, it is not, there's no analogy with the flu except it's viral. This is completely different. The exposure is completely different. The transmission is completely different, and the number of deaths is significantly different. So I'm not going to argue about the words. If you add the risk to that language, I think you'll be right on the money. But the fact is, they are doing what they have to do, and that is to make sure the risk of contagiousness. If we send them all back to school today, even 3 days a week and 2 days of virtual learning right now, with the escalation of the numbers, it's not going to be a positive result. So I think what Dan's trying to do is say we're doing everything we can possibly within the healthcare guidelines to keep our children safe. So you can add within healthcare guidelines, you can add with
that's already in there. Within guidelines is already in there. I mean, the guidelines and the health guidance is already in there in the next sense. I'm not saying that this is the same as the flu. I'm saying that if we can take actions that reduce the risk to an acceptable level, and that acceptable level being the same risk, for example, as the flu or car accidents, which are about the same. Right, I won't use flu, I'll use car accidents. Then I think you have a workable standard that we can use to keep people safe.
I don't agree.
I want to
work. But thank you, Dan, for doing what you're doing.
Okay, I do have one other piece on this flow chart that I want to highlight, and it's the part about the box that says, does the student have a health concern that prevents a return to school for instruction? And then if yes, we'll offer full-time virtual option for that student. One of the discussions we're having right now is it's without question when you do that if that student has a health concern. Okay, what about if that student has a family member with a health concern? should we have the same, opportunity? And I think we've already answered that. Yes, absolutely. And so then the next question is, what about for the parents who are just not comfortable sending their children to school? And it may not be a documented health concern, okay, but it's for that same reason. And are we going to be able to provide a virtual option, basically a choice of an opt-out? And our internal discussions are that, yes, we would like to be able to do that. We think it's the right thing to do. Understanding the more students that we might have in that situation, the challenge about how we're going to do that. That is one piece that I would be interested in board feedback tonight. Would you support the idea of us doing all we can to have some measure of choice? And I don't know if Krista, if I explained that well, Krista's kind of leading that discussion internally with us.
Yeah, I think you described it well. I think that's where we are in the discussion is we have some clear measures we can take for students with health conditions, or even practices for family members is an easy stretch in this circumstance. But I think our internal discussion has just been, this is a burden and people are going to struggle, and how we don't want to make it difficult. We're interested, yes, in consideration of that option for a variety of reasons without making it too challenging for families to navigate that.
Peter?
I think that there has to be a reasonably well-founded issue for both our staff, less so for families, but also for our staff. There has to be a concern. I mean, people with health concerns that put them in high risk, certainly that's something we need to consider and give flexibility on. But I think that those risks have to be well-founded.
Elizabeth?
I have a question, whether or not you've gotten any guidance at all, either from DPI or if you've discussed internally, how an option like that interacts with compulsory school attendance, particularly if you have an in-person option for students.
Yeah. From the feedback I've received so far from DPI, they're working on it, that they will be coming out with guidance. The expectation is that we will be given flexibility.
Okay. Elizabeth, and then Lorraine.
Yeah, just to sort of clarify so I'm of two minds about it, right? Because I appreciate that, and I think that there's a lot of good that can come of that, and also I think concerns around access, maintaining like high quality, all of those kinds of things become more challenging, obviously, as you're well aware, in a virtual setting. And so to Peter's point around kind of a compelling reason, I think that's an interesting kind of standard to consider. And also I'd be curious to know, as you're thinking about this option, right, like what does the instructional aspects of it really look like to ensure that students who are choosing to come in person, right, are getting the curriculum, rigor, all of those things, attention to the extent that you can for our students who are choosing to or not able to come in person. And so that would be my concern there. So just something to think about. I mean, clearly you are already, but that's what's on my mind in terms of like how to weigh those things.
Lorraine, and then Susan Fox.
Sure. So have we thought about, if the school is mandated to do online education, those students that don't do well with online learning, are there going to be extra supports for those students?
So the direct answer is yes, we need to find a way. What exactly that looks like right now, and I don't know if Lisa or Christy would like to speak to that.
I can share a little about that. Thank you for the question. In the spring, we realized quickly that different students responded differently to the emergency virtual learning. And our staff really did a wonderful job making sure they were reaching out and connecting with all of our students and families to see what their needs were. And as unique needs surfaced, again, whether it was our student services staff or individual teachers, making accommodations or different modifications. They were doing what they needed to do to differentiate, to be able to reach students in the best possible way. And that was when they had very little time to really plan and transition to virtual learning. So the last few months, particularly even now over the summer, teachers have been planning to take virtual learning, or whether that's full-time or even just a portion of the week when students return, to the next level, and find ways to reconnect with students more often in a synchronous fashion, or find ways to continue to build community, which we're missing a bit in the spring emergency virtual learning. So the short answer, as Dan said, is yes, but we really feel like the virtual learning that students would experience in the fall, if we have to go that route, will be an improved version or an enriched version from what families experienced in the spring when we closed so quickly.
Thank you, Lisa.
Okay, again, there's a lot of things that we can go through. So one of the things, if you don't mind, if I can just take a few minutes, and I just added this afternoon, so some of the board members may not have seen this yet. So I'm going to share my screen again. And what, again, this is just a very high level overview of our planning work. And so we've already talked about the guiding principles. And so for every one of these areas, okay, we're putting together action plans. And in some cases, it's small groups. In other cases, it's larger groups that are working on this. I just wanted to give you kind of a flavor of all the different things that we have in the works. Process-wise, right now, we have our principals and district level administrators meeting on a weekly basis, doing check-ins. And then from there, determining who is doing what, how we're involving staff in feedback, what processes and so on. So if you don't mind, I'll just kind of go through this whole thing briefly. Then we can come back and talk about any particular areas that you have, particular interest in, and our team, will be able to answer those questions. So communication, we start every meeting with communication and end it with communication, because obviously that's so key right now. And so looking at the loops about how we're communicating with staff, families, and community. Clearly, the very first thing we have to figure out is if we have students, the health and safety, as we just were talking about. And so we have, again, these are the kind of the key areas. There's a lot of sub areas under each of these with planning about how we're doing all of these areas. And so that is really a focus right now. Whether we have all the students back or whether we have some of them back, these things have to be in place. And so that is really a priority right now here in the month of July, is to get all those things figured out. And there's a lot of people involved. It's, obviously we involve staff and student services and nurses, but it's also on the facility side and the cleaning and the ordering of supplies, and so we have a lot of people involved with each of those areas. But that is definitely a high priority right now of getting those things in place. And we have gotten some very good guidance from both THS and Public Health, Dane County. It's just a matter of putting it all together, for our building. The instructional programming, you heard Lisa talk about quite a bit at our last meeting. I just want to remind everyone, item 2, that is our mandate, okay, that we have to have all 3 models in place, because we don't know at this point what fall is going to look like. We also don't know once the school year starts, we could come in and out of these models. And so we have to be prepared for deliver face-to-face. We have to be prepared if we can only have some of our students under physically distanced learning, and we have to be prepared to provide virtual learning. So we have all 3 of those in the works right now, not knowing which one we might start with, not knowing which one we might have to go to throughout the school year. We might end up in all 3 of those different learning models at one time or another. So that's the one of the challenges and the importance of the work that's happening this summer. And then I mentioned number 3, the parent-student opt-out is a real key, because that's going to help with our planning. We need to know if we're going to do that, one of the things we have to find out, well, how many students are we talking about, and how can we plan to staff that and so on. The student services, equity, inclusion, again, is one thing, providing the delivery of our instruction. We also know there's so many other variables, and it kind of gets a little bit to, Lorraine's question too, about the additional support outside the actual curriculum and teaching. So there's so many components there. And so that's another key role about supporting students, in addition to that. Okay, so once we get our instructional programs, our buildings, of course, there's a huge piece of human resources about how we're going to staff things, how we're going to deal with, servicing and supporting our staff for their own medical needs, and the workplace requirements, how we're going to be monitoring, reporting, how we're training our staff, and students for that matter. And so all those things, that we have, and again, public health, number 5, currently has requirements. We're in the process of finalizing those right now for our full year-round staff that are working in the summer. And of course, then that'll translate to when other staff return in August. The school nutrition, of course, is a key piece. We have, some positive news. USDA has been excellent about being flexible with us. And of course, we're working on the safety protocols as well about how we will serve meals, in the building or outside of the building for that matter. Transportation is a huge one. We, at this point, have guidance only. We don't have any requirements. We have clear, strong guidance about the expectation of physical distancing. So this is going to be one of those things that we'll see if we get a requirement from public health on this, or whether we simply have guidance that we have to make our own local decision. So that's something that hopefully we'll know soon as well. But that's a key thing is if we can have X number of students in the buildings, but you can only have so many kids on a bus, how are we going to transport? And then the cost potentially of running double routes and so on. So we're looking at a number of different scenarios there as well. The athletic activities we've put as a separate category because it's a lot of the same decisions, but they have to come earlier. High school athletics start in August. And so that timeline moves up. I will say right now, based upon the current order in Dane County, the majority of our high school athletics would not be allowed to run under the current order because of the expectations of physical distancing and so on. However, we do expect very specific guidance or requirements coming from public health, specifically towards our high school athletics, to help us guide through that. But that's one I would expect within the next, 2 weeks that we'll have additional information to be able to make decisions about fall athletics. We noticed just today, I think it was, or this week, at the college level, Ivy League decided there's no fall athletics at all. And I think you're going to start seeing more people follow suit, with that. And then other considerations, and this list will grow, but 4K has a very different requirements. Right now, the guidance or the requirements are that we're following daycare requirements, which are different than school right now. And so, we'll have to, navigate through that as well with our 4K program. And then one of the things we talked about recently is when we have a better idea of what school's going to look like, does our calendar still make sense? The traditional in-service days that we have. We're trying to find more training time for staff. Do we need to look at perhaps a revision in that school calendar about when staff reports and when school students do? That certainly for sure is a board decision. And so those are, again, these are kind of the major things. The list is, as I said, every one of these have subgroups underneath of them. And so, but that's kind of the big picture. So at this point, we got our team here to answer your questions. We'll take them and tell you exactly, we can go to as much detail as you'd like on any one of these areas.
All right. Anyone have any questions? Susan Fox?
Well, I guess once we have more guidance from public health and you can start to get into some of the nitty gritty, I was just wondering how because my understanding is we've pretty much said all teachers can have 10 workshop days, and it might end up having to be more than that, I don't know. But I'm just wondering how, will people be organized in grade level teams, subject teams? I mean, I'm wondering how the different buildings are handling that input. So teachers are having some input and working together, and at what point that happens, I guess, in the process. I don't know if anybody wants to.
The 10 summer curriculum hours specifically.
But yeah, the 10, yeah.
Yeah.
How that's being
Sure.
handled.
The summer curriculum hours that teachers are engaging in currently are arranged by their co-planning teams. So it's probably the grade level team when you're talking elementary. So it's maybe a first grade team or a third grade team, and the specialists who support that team. So it could be reading specialist, it could be a special education teacher, could be a student services person, an advanced learner, a resource support teacher. They are part of that co-planning team as well. When you look at secondary, then those teams are meeting more often by content. So it could be like the English 9 team or the chemistry team or the algebra 2 team. So they will be spending some of their hours then with their content colleagues, also then joined by other resource support teachers. So again, like an EL resource support teacher or an instructional coach or the like. So that's how they're planning right now through the summer.
So those meetings are going on now as we speak. So they're kind of in those meetings planning for all these different scenarios somewhat too.
We've asked them primarily to plan for virtual instruction.
Right, because that's the biggest change, right?
Because that's the biggest change, exactly.
Yeah. And I know I meant to mention earlier, there are a couple, Boardman and Clark always does a nice job with their workshops, and they have a couple coming up, one next week on student safety coming back, and then the second week is staff, and so to Peter, when you're raising the what will the standards be, I think they'll be talking about that a little bit in those workshops. So I'm register for those, they're free. Anybody can on the board can register. And I guess, this is not really a question so much as a statement. I guess when you think about scheduling, because you talked about scheduling some synchronous time, and it's harder than doing a master schedule for a school. And when you're looking at a home where there might be 2 or 3 kids of different grade levels in the house, and how they can, but I guess even within a school, if the first grade teachers are all meeting at this time, and for the specialists to figure that out, that's, I assume, something you're all working on right now too, because that's sounds like a nightmare to me, but. Okay.
It is. I mean, yeah, without question. When you look at, just the core classes,
right,
is one thing. Now you all the specials, and you talked about if we have a hybrid model, and what about when the kids aren't there? How can we expect teachers to be teaching face-to-face and yet still half their kids leading them virtually? Those are the things that, the challenges, and what is a realistic expectation of teachers, what's their capacity. So those are the details that we are working through, and where the teacher input is so important as well as we make those decisions.
Peter?
I appreciate the difficulty, the difficulty of this challenge, and B, the process that I think is a good process that you've put together here, and the work work you're doing in this. If there's anything the board can do to support this with temporary or flexible policy, don't let any of that be a limitation. Limitation to you. Do you? I don't know. You put teachers in teams that have larger groups, but they manage each has. I don't know. But if there's any policy or anything we can do to make this easier for you that needs to be done, please reach out.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Peter, and you're right, and that's something I've tried to reiterate in their conversations too. Is everything is on the table here, and so but you're right. There definitely might be policy or even handbook things that we might need to make some adjustments on. without question. And those are things we need to identify here real soon as well, so we can bring them to the board.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to communicate that this can be done on an emergency basis, that these are not permanent changes, that we're doing things to get through a crisis. But we do respect people's, the working conditions and the employment conditions here, and we may have to make temperature changes, but those can be emergency or temporary issues. And we will not try to use the emergency to put through to implement changes that are would not otherwise be acceptable.
Lorraine and then Susan Manning.
Our students have been through a lot with the pandemic and virtual learning. Are there going to be supports in place for them to support them with mental health?
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that, but it's well, first of all, it's one of the main priorities this summer. The work that the teachers are doing, one of the 3 tenets or areas of focus is social emotional learning, and infusing that and embedding that and talking about ways to build community, reestablish connection for all students. The student services team will support that as well. But then another parallel conversation is also kind of our shift in roles for student services, just with the emphasis on mental health support. So that group is going to spend some time just really figuring out and taking what we learned in the spring and some of the things we implemented and the different types of mental health needs, and what we know a little bit about what we might be able to anticipate just based on how that went in the spring and kind of the data we collected then. But yes, that is an absolute area of focus. No matter which model we choose, being able to assess and respond to mental health needs is a huge priority. Yes.
Susan Manning.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was just a wonderful question. And it's one that we received some resource material from Elizabeth. I don't know that it went to the whole board. I did want to, in support of our superintendent, our policy committee in the middle of all of this has met 3 times. We have evaluated 50 plus policies, including many of which relate to continued operations amid COVID-19 implications. We have that material right here. We'll be presenting some of the policies that are affected by this. And Dan actually runs our policy meetings. So for other board members, he brings in the policies to be changed. He basically effectively does the agenda unless we bring information from another source. And I fully trust in every way that if he needs a policy change to support going forward to the entire staff of the school district, we'll see it. And it will come from the committee to the board. So I want to reassure the other board members and thank both Susan and Elizabeth for devoting an incredible amount of time. So we spend 2 hours in a meeting. You've got to spend close to 8 hours out of that meeting reviewing the policies before you come into the meeting. We've had 3 meetings in the last really 4 weeks. So I want, if the community is watching tonight, to be fairly assured that we are working on these. There were also some excellent workshops provided by WSB, and they were doing them weekly about how to respond immediately during this time. And many of us watched those. I know Andrew saw some and Susan saw some, and we're still watching those, as well as the boardman Clark, and trying to keep up and support the district in every way we can with the information that we have. So thank you.
Okay. Elizabeth.
Hey, thanks for all of this. This is really great. I always love seeing you both present, Lisa and Krista, because it's like so clear that so much thought is going in to the work that's being done. And I feel like you represent the teams that are working on this really well. So thank you for that. I just have a couple of questions around clarity around screening and response under the school safety. So 5 sub-bullet A. I'm just kind of curious what that means. I also would be curious about where it says SCL and it's K-8 and kind of what the plan is for our 9-12 students around kind of those same ideas around sort of connectedness and safety, psychological safety, those kinds of things. And then the third question I have, and then I will pause on questions for a minute, is have you thought about or talked about it all? I'm sure you've thought about it, so I apologize for that. But have you talked about it all? Any changes that need to be made in terms of disciplinary policy? So when we think about students who are coming in maybe a little bit more dysregulated than they would have normally, or thinking about like if we have to do social distancing or wear masks or those kinds of things, it's like obviously there's some compliance components of that. So I'm kind of curious on kind of the flip side, right? So we're talking about all these proactive supports, but we talked about reactive supports as it relates to sort of some discipline policies that we have. And that's the only thing I don't see reflected here in any of the bullets. So kind of curious about the thinking there.
Yeah, I can talk about the first part. I just want to clarify that you're asking about the screening and response under school safety, like the student services aspect.
Yeah, so it's like student services 5A, it just says screening and response, and I was just curious about that.
Screening or health screening. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we have a screening, we have a universal screening process in place that we typically use. This kind of our standard universal screener routine for, covering grade levels and different at different levels with different type of screener. I think what we've talked about and what's been recommended in some of the DPI webinars the team has participated in and just being thoughtful is sort of like that, maybe less of a formal screen, but kind of we need a quick check. We need to know what our students have been through, how they're coming in, and some ways to maybe do more regular but more brief kind of screening or check-ins. So in a really broad sense, like that's just the topic that we've talked about, for K-8. And some of it's, what's going on in your family, how has this impacted you? For some of our kids who will have not had contact for 6 months. And so we need to sort of assess like how to sort of triage our supports, right? And kind of get a sense. We have that student services screening form that we put into place for the end of the year where students could reach out or family members could reach out. It's sort of based on that. That's kind of where we have a sense of, hey, we've got this representation of our population, but we really need to be able to ask everyone in a way that makes sense and is aligned to learning, and basically to find out can we support students so they can engage in learning no matter what learning looks like. So it's really at that, we haven't.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's what I was curious about. If you're thinking about like doubling down on a more formal screening or something a little bit more, like you said, brief, frequent, more of a pulse check.
Yes, exactly. That's the philosophy behind that.
Cool.
And then you asked about SEL for K.
Yeah, because it's K-8, but I don't see anything referenced specific for high school students. So I'm just curious.
It's a conversation. So the SEL conversation has been a social emotional learning, but it's been an ongoing conversation around getting our standards sort of like this was a pre-COVID conversation. The 4K8 reference is simply that like a discussion of our current model has classroom instruction, classroom counseling, whatever you want to call it, like lessons, universal lessons for SEL, formally like guidance, whatever you refer to. So it's that discussion of like, what's that going to look like for this year? Do we need to shift our routine? What universal instruction needs to be provided? How does the student services team support that? And does that need to look a little different potentially in the midst of a pandemic? Shelby met with our elementary group earlier this week, and I think it's not like a shift away from the SEL standards, but the emphasis on specific standards with some of the COVID-related anxiety and those pieces, as well as the social justice and racial justice component, like what's been happening in our community since we've last seen our students. So we've talked about having that team make some decisions about how to continue to lead that work, but maybe it will look different than your 30 minutes every other week lesson.
Sure.
The high school is also having those conversations. They just were left out, like they don't currently teach universally at the high school, but they're having that same conversation about their role. What does everyone need? What will some students need? And what standards are we going to emphasize?
Yeah. Well, this might be a good opportunity to think about continuity, right? If you're going to decouple yourself from a curriculum anyway.
It's actually of all a silver lining in all of this is the conversation we've been actively engaging in and trying to promote and thinking about how to take that next step and bridge with our, general education staff and really there's no doubt that this has to be a critical component. So we're actually kind of excited about the ability to take the next step with more active embedding of SEL standards into our content. So that's actually a plus. It's a lot of work, but it's work we were prepared to do. And I think the team is pretty excited to have some momentum there.
Great.
And I forgot the third thing.
It was just about discipline.
Oh, yes. And Shelby is here. She can feel free to weigh in. I will say that we have had those conversations. Absolutely. It probably does need to be reflected in here and maybe is under one of like kind of Dan said, the subsets of some of these pieces specifically. And I know Chris is here. She brings it up regularly. We have concerns about enforcement of things like a mask, masks requirements. And there's been a general realization that we need to carefully think through what implications this is going to have for our students and how we're going to be proactive in handling that. I don't know that we have a ton of answers. That same question about students and regulation and that preparation, I think other than front loading, kind of the SEL, community building, reconnect, build relationships, and we have a shared agreement and shared focus on how important that is, and teachers do as well, that takes the forefront. But yes, I mean, other than agreement that those are absolutely considerations that we have to address really specifically from an equity lens.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I do appreciate the heavy front loading. I mean, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think the reality is that you're going to have anxious adults, which, promotes dysregulation, and you're going to have anxious kids, which promotes dysregulation. And then you're going to put them in a space together. And so just, thinking through some of those, like when it happens, because it'll be inevitable, kind of what was our response look like. And then I'm done now. Thank you.
And Shelby's comment too, the restorative justice work, like our continued emphasis on that. And again, this may be another sort of silver lining opportunity, but really to continue and reinforce the work the teams have been working really hard to do the last few years, but just like, we have no choice but to kind of reemphasize those pieces too.
Great, thank you. I appreciate you all. Tell your teams I said the same.
Okay, was there any more questions? All right, Dan?
Okay, so the next time I report out to the board, like I said, I think it'll likely be a special meeting. I'll plan on having more of a format of decision-making, things that we've decided, things that we need board input on or board decision. So that's really clear. I think it's an important piece coming up and some clear timelines as well. So hopefully we get that guidance from public health soon. Regardless, we have plenty of work to do. It's not like we're just waiting for that. That'll just kind of help us, focus in on which model we might be starting with the school year. So.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Dan. All right. I'm moving on to board reports. Personnel committee meeting. Susan Fox.
All right. Well, mine will be short because we met on June 18th in the meet and confer to discuss insurance issues. And we've already kind of talked about that because that was followed by a special board meeting on June 22nd, where we made the decision to increase the staff contribution effective January 1st. That was the main outcome of that. It was one of the main asks during that meeting and the main outcome. We have another personnel committee meeting planned for the 21st, and we're thinking that may be a meet and confer also to talk about some of these issues that we're just talking about now in terms of teachers coming back, because they are raising questions about comfortability, people with pre-existing conditions, all of those kinds of things that we've alluded to in this conversation. So I suspect that we'll need to talk about some of that then, as well as then looking ahead to contract negotiation as well. And that's it.
Any questions? Okay, moving on to policy committee report, Susan Manning.
The policy committee has met 3 times, June 17th, June 24th, and I think it was July 1st. They reviewed, discussed, and approved as presented or amended based on Neola recommendations for board approval, 45 policies, which you will see this evening. So, and we are going to continue to meet frequently to try and adjust policies for the COVID virus. And I posted the report.
Okay. Thank you, Susan. All right, we'll move on to possible action items. First item is annual declaration and parent notice of district student academic standards that will be in effect for the 2020-2021 school year pursuant to section 120.12.13 and section 118.31GA of the state statutes.
Okay, academic standards have not changed, but statutorily, the board is required annually to adopt this resolution. So exact same one you've done for the last 6 years, just a due date on it.
Susan Fox.
I move pursuant to section 120.12(13) of the state statutes to approve the list and description of the student academic standards in the areas of mathematics, science, reading and writing, geography, and history that shall be in effect for the 2020-2021 school year, as said list has been presented in written form as attachment A with a date of July 8, 2020 in the board's packet of supplemental materials for this meeting, and with said academic standards constituting the board adopted standards that are required under section 118.30(1)G(a) of the state statutes. And I move to direct, can I do that? We have to vote on each one separately, or can I?
I think it could be one action.
You do it both.
Okay, right, doing both, okay. And I move to direct the administration to incorporate the board approved list and description of the student academic standards that shall be in effect for the 2020-2021 school year into a notice for parents and guardians that the administration shall provide in a manner that is consistent with the requirements of section 120.12(13) of the state statutes. When you have to actually read that, that's why. Go ahead, just do it. So now you need a second.
I'll second.
Okay, any discussion? All right, hearing none. All in favor, roll call vote. Andrew, aye. Susan Manning.
Aye.
Susan Fox.
Aye.
Elizabeth.
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Lorraine.
Aye.
Eric.
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion carries. Next up is use of an expulsion hearing officer for 2020-2021.
Again, this is an annual resolution we bring before the board. In the event that we do have any expulsion recommendations, board policy allows the use of an independent hearing officer. And so should you choose to do that again, as you have for many years, you must approve this resolution.
Peter.
Just to clarify, this doesn't require that we actually use a hearing officer for any particular expulsion. This just allows us to appoints one to use as we normally do, which is we use them for.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay.
Okay.
So I would move approval of the resolution to authorize appointment of the expulsion hearing officer for 2021 as presented.
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Andrew, aye. Susan Manning. Susan Fox.
Aye.
Elizabeth,
Aye.
Lorraine,
Aye.
Eric,
Aye.
Peter.
Aye.
Ayes have it. Motion carries. Next up is resolution for inclusion under the state Wisconsin Deferred Compensation Program.
All right, this one's Jared's.
So the district actually approved this resolution back in 2018. However, we have not had any staff participates. And so the state of Wisconsin Deferred Compensation Program Board has asked us just to have the board reapprove it since it's been a couple of years and we don't have anybody participating. What it is just another opportunity for staff to have another retirement account option. So when staff participate in WRS, we also have our 403B program, but this also gives them another option that is managed by the state of Wisconsin. So it's just a renewal of the original resolution, no language change from the previous one.
Peter?
Can you, Jared, clarify how a deferred compensation program works? Because the ones I'm familiar with, they avoid the taxes because the compensation is not actually paid to the employee. It's set aside in an account with the employee's name, but it actually is not, the ownership of that money isn't transferred to the employee. And that way there's no tax liability to the employee. But the downside of that is that the money is actually at risk because it doesn't belong to the employee. It belongs to the organization giving money. For example, if that money goes bankrupt or that organization goes bankrupt or something, that money is at risk. Is that how this works also, or is this a different setup?
It's very similar. Obviously, it's a deferred compensation. So when they use that language, there's very specific state statute and IRS regulations they have to follow. The difference is they have it somewhat set up similar to a 403B, where there is a little bit more protection. It's not 100%. So it definitely is deferring compensation. So there's less tax liability up front. However, when that money is pulled out, there's more tax liability at that time. I would tell you there is more risk than the 403B. With a 403B, you as the employee control that risk.
That's your money.
It's your money. With the deferred compensation, it's technically not your funds, but you are putting it in, you're agreeing to this. You don't have the options to add, I want to be in a conservative pool versus a high risk pool. Part of it is that you get higher returns this way potentially, but that's up to the employee. And perhaps that's why we haven't had any employees participate. Originally, back in 2018, we did have a couple of employees that were asking. And the thought is why would we offer this? Is that number one, that it's managed by the Employee Trust Fund, which manages our Wisconsin retirement system, which is a pretty solid program. The other part of it is that always wanting to be able to give employees the opportunity to invest in their retirement and having a trusted program through the state of Wisconsin Employee Trust Fund versus us going out and trying to find an independent that can give some other options is part of the reason that we decided to put this on. And it's completely voluntary. Obviously, we will continue to encourage employees that if they're going to participate in anything, that they truly understand the risk to them as the employee.
Are there any circumstances under which we could, or worse, we would be required to take that money back?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. I mean, because for example, in a private business, typically if you file bankruptcy, all that money can go to creditors.
Correct. And I think probably because we're a public entity and it's really part of the state of Wisconsin, I think they feel it's such a large pool that likeliness would not happen. But that was not something that we've talked about.
Okay. Thanks. I'd move approval of the resolution for inclusion under the state of Wisconsin Deferred Compensation Program as presented.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Andrew, aye. Susan Manny? Susan Fox?
Aye.
Elizabeth?
Aye.
Lorraine?
Aye.
Eric?
Aye.
Peter?
Aye.
Ayes have it, motion carries. Future board meeting start times.
Can someone talk about the
Yeah.
justification?
Dan, did
So,
you want to speak on
I'll
it?
start, sure. So, so that's one of the annual requirements at your reorganizational meeting in April, is that the board determines your regular meeting times. And so back in April, you approved the monthly meeting dates and times of the regular meetings. And as you know, because of our current situation and having virtual meetings, when we've had special meetings, the majority of the board members have been available for a little bit earlier meetings. We also, you know, as far as being accessible to the general public, it's a different situation now where it's generally now people are viewing through our live streaming versus attending in person. And so the consideration was asked, does the board want to consider perhaps a different meeting time under these, you know, circumstances? So that was not necessarily meant as a suggestion that was put out there. You can choose not to make any change or to whatever changes you might like.
Susan Manning?
Peter, I think I understood your question. And one of the things I think I'm asking some similar things. The rationale for the change? I mean,
Yeah,
usually
the
there's a
change
reason.
as a concern. The change in times.
Yeah, so Susan, what I talked to Dan about was, since we are in these certain times here, that maybe we don't need to be doing a board meeting at 7 o'clock. Maybe we can do it earlier. It seemed like that when we have some of the workshops and everything, and since we're in this pandemic, maybe we could do it early. It's just out there as a suggestion. And like I said, we don't have to pass. We can still stay with the regular. But I was thinking that for time's sake and not going in too late, you know, here it's almost like 9:30. If we was to start sometime like maybe 6 or even 5, if everybody was up to it, we can start early and be done a lot earlier.
No, that doesn't mean, if you start early, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be done. You dreamer.
Go ahead, Peter.
I have two concerns. One is public access at 5 p.m. Does that limit or restrict public access? Some of us can be flexible, but not everybody can.
Right.
And I would be concerned about public access. The other thing is that as the year goes on, it's going to be a little harder for me to be regularly available at 5 p.m. I like having the meetings earlier, but that I will start running into more and more conflicts as the year goes on, as you know, with me as the university goes through its different phased reopenings, and that might be problematic. So unfortunately, I think that I would prefer keeping the same meeting times.
Okay, that's what it was up there for. So everybody believes that we can just we can vote this down, or we don't even have to say anything.
You don't have to take action on it.
You don't have to take no action. Okay, Susan Manning?
Well, the other thing I think we need to seriously think about, and maybe that's on the agenda for the next meeting, we seriously, right now, there's no way we can finish the work that we need to do in one meeting a month. I mean, we've already met once this month. We're meeting another time this month. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to finish what we need to do. We've been here since 6 o'clock and it's now 9:30. We may, you know, one of the things we may have to consider is 2 meetings a month and schedule those out so that people are available. Anyway, it's not for this resolution, but as we think about what we want to do with our meetings, we should consider that.
Okay. All right, so we'll do no action taken on the future board meeting start time. All right, we'll just go ahead and move on to discussion items. First on the agenda is the School Resource Officer Agreement for 2020 to 2023.
Okay, so our current agreement did expire at the end of the past school year. And so procedurally, I do not have a new agreement for you to take or potentially take action on this evening. It's a discussion item only. And there are two reasons for that. First of all, our current agreement is currently under review from our legal team. One of the things that I was looking at for possible renewal is I asked Boardman and Clark to look at our agreement with respect to comparing that to our policy and how, do they have any recommendations for additional language in the actual agreement with regard to the roles and expectations of school resource officers. But as they did that review for me, they also, it appears that we've continually renewed the same agreement year after year, and it hasn't been under review by our legal team for many years, and they have some other recommended changes. So I have shared that information with both the City of Monona and Village of Cottage Grove that we will be recommending some changes, to the agreement. And so that we're working through, right now. So I did attach the current agreement for your review, and then moving forward, we'll have some, recommended changes. Secondly, of course, it's not a secret that most or many school districts are assessing or reassessing their SRO programs. And so it would be worthy as well to have discussion about the program and make sure that all of our board members fully understand how our SROs operate in their schools and their roles and so on. So we have asked our principals to join us this evening so that they can answer any questions and speak to some of the work that our SROs do in the schools and supporting their students. You also were given copies of our monthly reports written by our school resource officers. And as you look at those monthly reports, you'll see that they have to record, certain, incidents and so on with students. And but clearly that does not describe everything they do on a day-to-day basis. And so that's where I think our principals can get a little bit more anecdotal information as well about some of the other things that they might do. And so with that, as far as how we might proceed, I think we might just start with questions from the board of our administrators, anything you have about our school resource officers.
Peter.
I think we talked briefly previously about training. And in the documents, what I don't see is training and qualifications of the officers. I'd like to see that. I don't think we have a policy about training, but I'd like to see what training that they have received. And I would like to know if that's aligned with best practices for SROs. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, what's the purpose of the SRO program? I mean, I see a job description, but I don't see a mission statement. What is it that we're trying to accomplish? And the reason I'm asking that, because we're spending $160,000, I want to know if that is being spent successfully. Are we getting our money's worth, or not? That's the wrong words for it. Money's worth, the wrong words. But are we achieving with that money what we're trying to achieve with what we want to achieve? And is that what we're trying to achieve directly related to the school's mission? And or is there a better way to spend that money to get those things done? And what I don't see is, what is it we're trying to accomplish with an SRO? So if you can comment on that now, or if you have additional documentation or some way to answer that in the future,
well, we'll start with documentation. There is none. Okay. So the program, from what I can tell, started either in the late 90s, early 2000s. And at that time was pretty much around the country. There was federal grant money at that time available for all public schools. And so that was, but as far as what I could find in this district, there's never been any kind of written documentation as you suggested. So, one of the things that I'll speak to real briefly with regard to the training, and that's one of the questions that I have for the attorneys is that the sort of thing that we want to have in the agreement about expectations? Our school resource officers do go through training before, before they began the positions. There's training offered by the National School Board, or School Resource Officers Association. Most of their training is provided by, their local police departments. They do try to attend some things as they come up, related, to their work. Rarely is it things that we send the officers to. Many times it's through their departments, but unless, again, the principals are aware of other specific things that I'm not, I might want to speak to that.
I can certainly talk a little bit about Luke Wunsch, who's the Monona officer. He's part of a monthly SRO group for Dane County. They meet once a month, kind of talk best practice. I know that Luke and I have been to a couple of trainings together, looking at things like rally points and reunification points, threat assessment protocols. So he's done quite a bit that's very specific just to the school and kind of best practice with that. And then, like Dan said, I know the majority of his training comes through the Monona PD or through some state agencies.
I mean, do you know if there's any specific formal training that relates to being an SRO and dealing with the issues of adolescence in a school setting?
Yeah, I mean, I know that he goes through de-escalation training. So, I think it's primarily verbal. I don't know specifically if that's a requirement or if it's specifically just for SRO, if that's his department.
What did you do before we had an SRO when it came to discipline? And the types of incidents that the SRO is involved in, and how are things handled, and how are they handled differently today? You might not be able to answer that question.
No, I think I can. I can, because I mean, I can think of a good example. Like we have lots of instances when that happens. So like if Luke is out for training for several days, we don't have an SRO in the building. So that's pretty routine. I will say that what happens is if we ever have incidents, we're calling the police. We're having the police come in the building that don't know the kids, that don't have relationships with them, that don't know a lot of the things that are, I think, really important to build trust and build comfort. And so it's something that becomes very apparent that when you have someone in the building that knows the kids, that knows the parents, things go a lot more smoothly and it's a lot more comfortable. Calling an officer that the kids don't know to a situation they don't know anything about, that may have a lot of backstory to it, and may be pretty dicey. It can be really tricky, and it's usually not advantageous for the officer or for the family or the kids. So, that would be, I guess, how I would respond to it.
You say the officer has has a relationship with the students. Is that the relationship building, is that equally distributed across the student body, or does that end up where different students, where there's specific groups of students where there are better relationships with the officer than others?
I can speak for just the high school, and I know Chris can certainly talk about the middle school. I think one of the things I really appreciate about the kind of the SRO philosophy is that it's not just totally reactive. I know that Luke's in classrooms. Every sophomore knows Luke because he's in every health class. He's in practical law class meeting with the seniors. He's in current events class when they're talking about issues like we're debating. He'll talk with classes and kids on that. He's at lunch duty, talking with kids. His office is in student services, so kids see him as they're coming in. So I would say it's a pretty wide cross section. There's certainly some kids that know him better than others, just from their, unfortunately, maybe their involvement with some things that he's going to know them. But I would say he makes a pretty concerted effort to make sure that he's really is a resource for all.
What would you change about the program?
I'm not sure that I would change much. I mean, I think I really appreciate the fact that our SROs really work on building relationships with kids. I look at them as another staff member in our building that is available to help kids. So when if there's a kid in crisis, it's kind of like I go through my mental Rolodex of like who knows the kid, who can be the best ally. And I think it's a testament that a lot of times our SROs fill that role. I mean, and I know Chris feels the same way because Officer Jess is phenomenal. And so I think the fact that it's somebody that's got a lot of training, somebody that really has an even head, that can act as a resource to help kids when they're really having a rough time.
Yeah, and I would just like to add, you know, you mentioned discipline, Peter, and I see that as a very small part of what our SRO does. I think that she helps us all be very preventative. I think she's a very strong link between us and the community. I think that, you know, we really work hard at not being intimidating, whether it's an associate principal or an SRO officer. We talk a lot about uniform, non-uniform. We talk about meeting and greeting kids. I mean, our kids call her Officer Jess. Just good relationships. And she can also give us a heads up sometimes like, hey, you know, keep an eye on this, or hey, keep an eye on that. And we have a lot of behind the door conversations about like, is this a school issue? Is this a home issue? Who should we involve here? You know, if we have a student that's in trouble and we are kind of like, should we be calling social services? She's a great resource to be like, yes, you should, or no, you shouldn't. Or if we have, you know, a student who may be, you know, talking self-harm, there's just so many avenues. She just brings such a wealth of information. And earlier in the meeting, we talked about student services, and I just see her as one of our student service members. I think she's invaluable, and I think that she is a positive link to our community. So
I have just one more question, if I can do that, which is, you know, that one of the concerns people have with SROs is this, you know, is the escalation of events that normally would be handled in the school that end up being handled by the justice system. And I would like to get both of you to comment on your observations of that, and what was going on in our schools appropriate, and how is that working? What's the impact on our kids of that effect in our schools?
I can't speak for Chris necessarily, but we work together, so I think our philosophies are pretty similar. There's a very clear delineation between our roles and the SRO's roles. You know, we're administrators, administrative issues, we're going to handle it. The SRO is not just you know, in our building, a fifth administrator. So we really try and make that very clear, and to not muddy the waters. And I think that, you know, when we're really, I would say, when you're looking at like those reports that that officers Luke and Jess provided for you, I think that you'll see the majority of those incidents are the result of kids coming to them. So, you know, with things with thefts, things with problems at home, kids reporting things to them, rather than them looking for things or looking for reasons to kind of go after kids. So I certainly understand where you're coming from, and I can certainly understand that there's a lot of distrust of kids with an SRO, and they feel like there may be, you know, somebody embedded in their school looking to bust them. But that at least has not been my experience from my administrative role.
Just be clear, I'm not coming from anywhere. I just want to hear what you have to say about these issues that have been raised in public.
And I would say that we have fewer. I would say that Jess is able to de-escalate a lot of situations, and we are able to handle them in our building, and they stay there. So I think that with her help and us working together, we're able to be more proactive, and for things to be able to end and not have to go on to the system or go on to court or go on to a ticket or go on to things of that sort. So
Elizabeth, then Eric.
I think Lorraine had her hand up too.
Oh, Lorraine, I didn't see her hand up. And then, so who was saying what, Lorraine, was you up first?
Do you want to go first, Lorraine?
It was Elizabeth that was first, but either one, I can go.
Well, so I have a kind of a general wondering, right? So I hear you talk about community benefit. I hear you talk about connection. I hear you talk about relationships. I hear you talk about like mental health support. Like those are really, really important jobs. And those are important jobs and that are traditionally filled by student services, right? And our student services are really good at doing. And so a wondering that I have is, knowing that we have a group of folks, right, who are uniquely trained to be able to do those jobs, what is the net benefit of having a police officer do that job? That's the kind of the next step for me, right? Is like, why do we need a police officer to do that particular job, or really any job inside of a school? So I'd just be curious about your thoughts there.
Yeah, my answer to that would be is that she has some connections to the community that we maybe don't have yet. She's been in the community for a long time, and she understands some dynamics, and she understands. I think that Jess is a true outreach person. I think she's an extension of us. I also think that, you know, when there are situations that do require, you know, we've had some situations, unfortunately, at GDS that have required, you know, a police officer, and she's right there and she knows the student or knows the kind of the situation. She's much more able to handle it and get it calmed down quicker. She's also able to provide us advice sometimes on how to deal with situations, how to work with families, where to find families, where to find parents sometimes. You know, once in a while we have a student who tends to leave school, and Officer Jess always knows where the student is. So, you know, just stuff like that. She's very in the know. And like, well, we have a delineation of this is a police matter, and this is, you know, for you to handle, and this is a school matter, and this is for you to handle. When it's two adults, then we can work together to kind of work through some things to do what's best for the student.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess, and this would be more of like a larger wondering, or maybe kind of a thought for you, Dan, to think about is, I think it's important to have a community benefit in that kind of way, right? Someone that really is connected to the community, that liaisons with the community, that supports school and community partnerships. I think that there are other ways that we could think about fulfilling that role, because I agree that it's a really important one. A wondering that I would have around the connection to like the police department in general, right, for rapid response, for kind of the things that you're talking about. Is there anything, Dan, that like precludes us from just building a good community relationship with the local PD that doesn't involve us contracting with them, right? So that, you know, we know who to call, and that you're able to have those conversations with folks. And, you know, if a student elopes from the building, right, then you're going to go through those protocols. So just kind of curious about that from your perspective, Dan.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer's got to be yes. Of course, that's something that's important in being able to build those relationships. You know, I think the challenge is, you know, as was mentioned, you know, individuals versus working with an entire department. But do I think there's opportunities that we can do more? Without question.
Lorraine?
Sure. I have two unrelated questions. One, I want to address the elephant in the room, and that's our students of color. I mean, how are they impacted? Are the incidents higher with our students of color? You know?
Yeah, thank you for asking that, Lorena. And I apologize, I failed to mention on one of the other data pieces that was shared was a report based on what we have with incidents, and Shelby put that together for us. And so, Shelby, would you like to be able to speak to that and the report that you shared?
Sure, absolutely. So what you'll see there is the recorded events with SRO involvement within our schools through Infinite Campus. And the first slide is just basically a breakdown of the last 2 years. Total number of incidents, and then total students with incidents, and then by school. And then the next two slides are the demographic breakdowns. for those 2 years as well. And you can see the percentage rates there. I'm happy to take questions after I go through this. And then the last 2 slides are the number of events and then by event type. So what category did those events fall under? Lorraine, do you have any specific questions from the slides 3 and 4 there about the demographic breakdown after you see that?
I'm just having some difficulty accessing it.
Oh, okay.
Lori, I went over those slides and looked at the percentages, and although it is, you know, we have a small percentage of Black African American students, going by the percentages, it is the events as they're identified here are a little bit higher than our percentage in the school. So it's hard to understand with such low numbers, but I mean, looking at, you know, 2019 and 2020, we have, it's just 2 students, 2 Black African American students. It's still 5%, which is more than 3% that we have in the school. It's hard to tell with those numbers because they're so low. The numbers are so low for the amount of students that we have in the school. So I think that your concern that you brought up is, you know, I don't think the data is going to really show that. It's not going to show what we need to see.
Yeah, this is obviously the quantitative piece, but what is the qualitative piece, I think is what you're kind of alluding to, Eric, possibly?
Yeah, exactly. Correct. The quantitative piece isn't going to tell the story. So.
And obviously with this past school year, that was, you know, it's only through March, you know, so it's obviously less number.
Peter and then Susan Fox.
And Andrew, I still had another question though. I could ask.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
Lorraine had a second
Lorraine
question
did.
too, I think.
Lorraine,
Oh,
why don't
that's
you
right.
go ahead and I'll go after.
Yeah, we just off.
That's okay. My second question is unrelated, and it's in regards to teachers. So when teachers have discipline issues, do they refer to the SROs to handle discipline issues, basically?
No, those, again, we talked about the delineation between administrative roles and SRO. It's always going to go through an administrator. If administrators ever feel like it's an imminent safety issue, then we'll ask the SRO just to be there with us. But I mean, at least in the high school, it goes through the associate principals or the principal.
Same at the middle school.
All right, so Eric, now you just.
I just kind of have a clarifying question. I think this is probably for you, Dan. I really would like to know some more information about this contract that we have. And as a school district, do we have any say in the types of tickets they write for certain offenses? And I'm particularly concerned about the offenses of truancy, drugs, and some of the language ones. Or once we go into that contract, do they have to go by what police have to do, which is enforce the law? How does that work?
Yeah, ultimately, the decision is up to the police officer anytime that if there's, you know, a citation. Our role in the school is whether or not to make referrals. And, you know, so truancy is a really, yeah, I'm glad you asked about that one. That's one that, you know, I think our school administrators work really closely and really are, you know, quite thoughtful about when, you know, there's an actual citation you know, in most cases or many cases, it really is a last resort, and with the idea of how can we do something. You know, we've exhausted everything and trying to get kids to school. But anyway, to answer your question specifically, Eric, yeah, that is completely up to the control of the officer whether or not to issue citation.
Can I just clarify too that the number of event types and events don't correlate with citations in this data that I shared? I just want to make sure that's clear.
Okay. But then my follow-up question is, if we look at, the events for the 1920 school year and the use of drugs or tobacco, which is 16 events, are you telling me, Dan, that, or maybe the principals can speak to this, that those are usually events that are referred by administration to the police?
Yes, that's correct. So yeah, anytime that we have drugs, alcohol, nicotine, those are things that we would involve our SROs in. Yeah.
So as a district and an administrative within our policies, we do have some say on whether those would be referred to police or not then.
Absolutely. And I'm actually, now you mentioned, I do want to go back and check our policies. I know we have some policy that requires referral to law enforcement, and I don't recall exactly where the line is on some of the things, but I know drugs and weapons for sure our policy requires.
Well, and one of our issues the last couple of years, just to be honest, has been vaping. Since nobody seems to know what they are actually smoking when we have them tested. Sometimes they come back as nicotine, and sometimes they come back as just oil, and sometimes they come back as THC. And that's high school and middle school.
I understand that. My main concern is, I don't want to be putting students into the system with tickets if they're for vaping or drugs or tobacco. I want to be working with those students so they understand the health concerns related to that and making sure they have the resources to make an informed decision. But to me, that starts that road of setting up some of these students to constantly be in this system that they'll have a hard time getting out of. And that concerns me a little bit. So if there's a way to mitigate that or look at that, or whether it's by policy or whatever, that's my main concern when I look at this. I kind of fall right in the middle here, just professionally being a teacher and with SROs in the schools, because I think there's some good things, but I also have a real serious concern with some of these nonviolent issues too. So that's kind of just my thoughts on it, and then I'll just leave it there.
Peter?
I just wanted to comment about the numbers, which is, if you look at the demographic breakdown by race 2019-20, if you take all of the, add up the total of all the minority students, you get 44% involved in the incidents, which is much higher than the population. And it's also a statistically significant difference, because now you're talking total of 50 events, and almost half of them involve minority students. And this is simply a reflection. It's a numbers right on reflection of the disproportionality we see in Wisconsin when it comes to this kind of these issues. So we're no different, we're no better, we're no worse. We're seeing statistically right here the same disproportionality that is plaguing problem. I'm not going to go on about the origins of these because I don't think we know well what the origin of this disproportionality is. I would also point out about 50% of the events are use, possession of alcohol, tobacco, and drugs. Those by far the most common incidents involving our SROs.
First, Susan Fox, and then Elizabeth.
Well, that's one of the things that concerns me too. I mean, I look at the citations and I think, I just don't know if I think citations should be given in all those cases. It bothers me a little bit. I see in the job description, it says very clearly the SRO is not the disciplinary arm of the school district and will not normally become involved in discipline issues or the enforcement of school rules, except as they relate to maintaining a peaceful and safe environment. That's a little vague for me. I liked imminent danger. I think Jason, you said, or somebody said imminent danger better. I think we should think about that, because the other thing I have a little bit of I just read some of these things. I think, some of these maybe could have been restorative justice issues. Maybe you don't need a citation. I just don't know. And one of my concerns, because I think when I talked to previous board member who'd been on the board for a number of years and has been now off for a number of years. And he was here when the first SRO came in the 90s. And it was about the time the DARE program ended because there was some view that wasn't working well. And there were some grants, I think, and they were looking for ways to do that connection with the police department and the community and the schools. That's kind of how part of it started. And part of me just wonders if just having that person in the building, how careful we are not to, just because they're there, rely on them more than when we didn't have them in the first place. And I'm torn too, because I see a huge advantage to having the kids know these people versus having an emergency and having to call on people they don't even know. Because I think they are more skilled at de-escalation skills. And I believe there was some talk about, I think the intention is, if we renew this, that the SROs would be involved in the equity training that's ongoing on professional development days, which was an oversight that they weren't included last year. And I get that, why they weren't. But I think that's important. Just listening to the Monona police talk about it, that as a police force, they get about 8 hours of that type of training, and 8 hours is not very much. So I use all those things are kind of not to think about it. I mean, I just wonder over the years how it's been used and whether their impact has changed, or because I do see some real positives. I just am a little concerned about the citations and having kids get records early on.
Elizabeth, and then Susan Manning.
Yeah, I want to kind of expand, actually, Susan, on what you were saying and dive in a little bit around Lorraine's question around discipline. So I completely understand what you're saying in terms of, like, there's a delineation between administrator does discipline and school resource officers have this sort of other role. And I wonder if we're being intentional, maybe not intentionally, but unintentionally narrow about our use of the word discipline. Because when I look at, like, the reporting, for example, right, it's a lot of, like, I called to assist for noncompliance. I called to assist for, a student left the building, a student got into an argument with the teacher, or had words with the teacher, I got called to assist. And from my perspective, that's discipline little d, right? There's a disruption in the environment. Someone's going to come in and kind of and do something about that. And so I think that it's important for us when we're thinking about discipline. It's not just like big D violations, citations, those kinds of things, but also these sort of like slow, kind of persistent grinding events. And to Susan's point, the ease of which that I as an educator can say, like for example, first day of school, right? Here's a second grader, and like the police officer was called to assist with that student, right? And so I have concerns about that. In terms of like the persistence of that, for one really specific reason, right? Which is that if we're really going to talk about safety and talk about safety in a meaningful way, what we know is that the SRO research at best is mixed in terms of producing safety, but we do know that kids who aren't feeling safe in the environment, right? If you're dysregulated, then you can't learn. And so it's going to impact the learning of our students, particularly our students of color, who, although, and I appreciate, Peter, you doing the math there, because I was doing the math there too, around kind of the aggregate there, but like, it doesn't matter if it's one kid or two kids or 10 kids, right? If you have a student that's there that is at least somewhat dysregulated, right, because of some potentially avoidable staff pieces, then that creates a major safety concern, and also impacts disparities, not even as it relates to discipline, but also as academics. And so those are just the kind of the things for us to think about as a board, as we're thinking about this, is like, what do we mean when we say discipline? And what does that kind of low level persistent involvement look like? And I'd be interested in the principals kind of around that aspect of it, right? Like how often are they called to assist in sort of like non-compliancy kinds of things? And then also just thinking specifically around safety as a broad concept, not just physical safety or the sense of security, right? But what does it mean to really have good psychological safety in an environment, and who's getting the benefit and who's getting the harm, and being mindful that we're applying that equal weight to what those two items are.
I'd be happy to speak to that a little bit. I just in terms of how I've seen the position change, is there's a much larger emphasis on assisting with students' mental health. I can think of at least five instances where we had students that were extremely dysregulated to the point of threatening other people, threatening to kill themselves. And Luke was phenomenal in getting that student in a place that we can process, that we can calm down, that could maybe lead to getting some voluntary help. So I understand what you're saying, because it's a trade-off. I get that there are going to be some students that are going to be very dysregulated and not appreciate having a police officer in their school. I totally understand that.
Well, and respectfully, Jason, like that's not their training, right? That's not the training of a police officer to do suicide risk assessment on a student. That's why you have student services staff. And so while I am glad that there are people there to serve that role, right? Because if we've got a student who is contemplating suicide, right, or at a risk for themselves, we need support there. A wondering that I've had is that the support? And Chris, I would look to you more around kind of how SROs get utilized from the mental health aspects of it. And sorry, Jason, I interrupted you there.
No, I'm fine.
You know, I know
That's a
some.
around the training and like what is the actual need we're asking people to fulfill. I appreciate Chris's like that community connection lens and sometimes access to resources, but I think the question is what do we need in terms of mental health support, and what individuals do we need to fulfill those roles, and what training do they have?
I think that, you know, sometimes like when I sit here and if I wasn't in the job that I was in and somebody said, oh my gosh, on the first day of school, a second grader and we needed a police officer, I would think like, what? You know, but man, we have incidences, and we have incidences where kids are, we need to use physical like holds on kids sometimes. And it is, whether they're so, if we want to use the word dysregulated or angry, or if it's mental health, or if it's a cognitive disability. And when, when you have 900 students in a school and you want to have at least 2 trained adults there, it's comforting having a resource officer there and with you and with that help. So there's just so many things that go on in a building when you have 1,000 people in it. I wish I could speak to the numerous things that Officer Jess does, like the relationships that she has, and the kids that seek her out, and the kids that know they're maybe starting to have a rough time, and they're like, can I just like spend 5 minutes with Officer Jess? You know, Jess, can this child spend 5 minutes with you? Yes. You know, and then they might talk and they might not. And then they go back to class. I mean, there's just so many things that go on. It's hard to speak to.
Susan Manning.
I just can't thank administration enough for coming tonight and talking to us about this. I think there's no question that we need to look at the policies better, and maybe administrative rules, and make sure that the lines are clear, make sure the contract is well written. But I think so one of the things Elizabeth was talking about was building a relationship with the police force without an SRO. And I'm telling you, the people that have worked in these buildings with the kids are absolutely incredible people. You have Jason and Chris talking about Jess and Luke, and when there's an event, a lot of kids do go to this particular person. They're a support staff person. And if we want them to be better trained, we can write that in. You know, first of all, I don't know that we have a full list of the training that they do have and they are getting. But I mean, I had 3 children that went through the school district, probably over a period of 20 some years. And they absolutely loved Officer Brennan. He's now retired, and he is a baby cuddler at Meriter Hospital. He goes in and holds neonatal babies all day long. I mean, understanding there's certain personalities that we need that fit with us. But I trust people like Jason and Chris and Shelby and Krista to help us find those people. And if it isn't a good fit, I'm betting they'd be the first to come to us and say, this is not a good fit. Chris, am I right?
Danielle?
Hi, you guys. I've been kind of silent and just listening, and I appreciate all of the conversations. I think that my background is secondary, and from being a dean and personally working with our SRO like very closely, and an administrator, like there were so many times where I definitely utilized and leveraged that partnership. But I think we need to separate the personality and the person with the position. And it can get really muddy when we start to think about people and relationships, because often when we're working in these environments, you build that relationship and build that capacity, which is a natural thing. It's actually kind of honorable that in this district, SROs are that tight with students and administration, which is kind of awesome to hear and see, because my experience has been very different in other spaces. But I do want to share that there's certain things that we can do to tighten up policy to ensure that administrators are well trained for emergencies, such as what are our protocols for if there is an intruder or an imminent threat, right? What are we doing to prepare our staff to make sure that they know what a lockout means or a lockdown, right? What are we doing to make sure that we are truly ensuring that the safety of the building? Because my experience, this is my truth too, so I don't know, I'm super nervous by talking, so I hope you listen, but my truth is that when I was at Sun Prairie and I was a dean, there were 2 separate incidents where students brought actual weapons like guns to school. And it wasn't the SRO that stopped that situation, it was me, right? And regardless of those types of things, there are certain things that will happen that we need to be prepared for, but we would call the police anyway for that situation. And so when we look at the long-term effects of having SROs in schools, we think about what happens to that child while they're in our building, which is a priority, but then also when they go back in the community, and then what happens when they graduate and they're adults. It will be so disheartening to know that a second grader was restrained with an administrator and a police officer, 1, that breaks trust, and 2, that causes trauma that may not manifest till later. And so those are things that we really need to consider and think about, is the overall health and well-being of our students, and not just relationships with officers. Because, and I can speak also because my husband law enforcement, so like I'm totally like I can totally see the benefit, but at the same time we often have conversations as well about the role in itself. Officers are not trained to de-escalate for schools. They have de-escalation training, but that's for the community. I just know this for a fact because my husband was never trained in that capacity. They are trained specifically for their role. And so we should think about how we could leverage that position and maybe shift it so we can continue to build capacity, continue to have relationship with the community as far as things that we may need to know, but is it necessary to have an actual police officer in our building working with our kids and staff?
Peter?
Kristen, I hear what you're saying about all the things that and Jason and all the things the SRO does for you. However, they're not in the job description. The only thing that the job description says that's a positive thing that the SRO is supposed to do is criminal activity and incidents normally handled by the police will be dealt with the SRO. The job description, that's the only job in the job description. It has a lot of things about their uniform and what they do during the summer, but the only thing related to the students is handle criminal activity. Now, that leaves me with a little difficulty evaluating, or the district as a whole, this program and the success of this program. So what I would suggest is that you guys, everybody's involved with the SROs, take a look at this job description. And those things, if we expect the SRO to be involved in de-escalation, that should be in the job description. Community building, whatever, that should be in the job description. That way we can look, oh, you need to be appropriately trained. You need to be appropriately resourced to do that. The job description just doesn't say that. So I would really strongly encourage, so that we can do this, have this SRO program go from a, be thoughtfully done, that those things that we want the SRO, the things we expect the SRO should be in the job description, so that we have a unified approach to this. And that's my comment. I want to move forward with the process, and part of that is having sort of complete documentation, complete expectations, and an understanding, so everybody understands, and we can point at something and say, the SRO needs to be able to do this because it's in the job description. The other comment I would have, I've been looking into this, people talk about school safety. The research is not finding that SROs improve school safety. They don't have a significant a measurable impact on school safety. And we should take that into account if school safety is part of the reason for having an SRO.
Elizabeth?
I totally agree with you, Peter. And I would imagine that part of the reason why some of these things maybe aren't in the job description is because I suspect they're out of scope for what you would expect a police officer to do, right? And so I think we can talk about redesigning a job description, but at the end of the day, like, it still has to be a good fit match with like what the purpose of that role and position are. And so I would really question, like, minor de-escalation is one thing, but like when we start talking about, like I said, like suicide risk assessments, for example, like that is a whole nother subset, or mental health supports, a whole nother subset, skill set, which requires specialized training. And so I'm okay with this idea of like, let's relook at the job description, but I really want us to be mindful of ensuring that what's in there is within the scope of what that job ought to be and what that person would bring. And so I just wanted to say that aspect of it. And then I'm completely in agreement with you kind of around the data. And what we do know around the data of school safety is what improves school safety is feeling connected and engaged and safe in your environment. And we know how to do that, right? We do it by building relationships with kids. We do it by making sure kids feel included and seen within their schools and school environments. And the research is very clear that if you do those things, then you'll see an increase of safety in your environments.
And Lorraine, and then Susan Manning.
We are seeing around the country a distrust that people of color have with law enforcement. We learned at the Black Lives Matter March that our students are impacted by their experiences in our schools. What are we going to do to foster better relationships with our students of color in regards to our SROs? Jason, are you able to answer that at all?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I can tell you that some of the kids that spoke have very good relationships with Officer Wunsch. I can tell you that a lot of those kids come to seek him and come to his office. So I think part of that is making yourself available for all students, showing that you care about all students, taking students' concerns seriously, following through. And I think it's a lot of relationship building. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm just thinking from my lens, that's something that I have seen work.
Do you think that we need improvement in that area?
Of course, absolutely, 100%. And I think that's the same for all staff in our district. I think that's something that we all need to work on.
Yeah, I think that's my thought with that. And the first thing that came to my mind with that one too is that, I have a hard time when we group people, whether it's people of color or police officers. And I like, I believe that Officer Jess is a very positive influence on our students of color. And I believe a lot of our, especially female students of color, would be very upset if she were to be gone. I see her as an ally. I feel like I could be better at dealing with a lot of our students of color. Like, Jess is better than me sometimes, I feel like, and I could be better at it. So, like, when you first said that, Lorraine, my first thought was, Jess has got one up on me there. I got to get better. So, like, when you say that some students have like mistrust for SROs or for police in general, like, why is it just police? Like, I feel like it's, I mean, I understand why it's police right now and everything bad that's happened, but man, there's some really good, like, Jess is really good at building relationships with those kids. And I know that I could get better, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, our students of color would lose out if Jess were to leave our school. And I understand what you're saying, Danielle, when you're saying try to take the personality out of it. But in my situation, I can't. Because if we did have like when we have had to have other Cottage Grove police officers come in and deal with the situation, it's not the same. They're not the same with the kids. They don't have the soft skills. They haven't been around the kids. They haven't been around us. They don't have the same skills. And I worked also at the high school for 4 years and with MG21 for probably 6 years. And when you have outside people and not your resource officers come in, regardless of, and I don't know what everybody's training is, they're just much more harsh and to the point. The people who are in the schools, as in Luke and Jess, they learn how schools work. They see us work with families and with students, and they see us, so they learn from us and we learn from them. So I'll stop talking because this is getting long and I'm sorry I'm tired, but like, I just think that in this instance, we have to keep individuals a little bit at mind.
Susan Manning.
Well, you know, based on what we've heard tonight, it almost feels that, at least for a year, as we investigate and work on the policies and procedures, and that this is almost an administrative decision. They're the ones who need these people, who see them as a team, as a support member. And in this particular case, I would feel uncomfortable not following the administrative recommendations for the individuals that are supporting them in their schools. The other thing I wanted to mention is I also did a lot of research on the SRO issue. And again, it's not on a police person in the building, it's an SRO. And right now, the body of research on the ability of SROs and school safety is very limited because it hasn't been studied in that manner. The studies often are a police officer coming into the school versus an SRO. And they talk very seriously about school resource officers as part of evidence-based threat assessment team. And they've contributed to reduced suspensions, less bullying, better school climate, and increased safety for all students when utilized in a multidisciplinary team approach in schools. And I think that's what we're hearing from administration, that right now that kind of person is operating in that position.
Any more comments or questions?
I just add to the chat some empirical studies on this research that is prevalent out there, based by Harvard mainly. So you can totally read that. I have so much more if you guys want to email me.
That would be great.
Yeah, absolutely.
That'd be great. I'd love to be.
Thanks, Danielle.
I also think we should clarify that a multidisciplinary approach is not about a person wearing multiple hats. It's about engaging with a larger team of people of which are cross-cutting and doing multidisciplinary work.
Right. I totally agree.
I think that's important.
I have another question too, and I'm sorry, my dog was calling me. I had to go let her out, do the usual dog thing. But I was wondering, Shelby, and so maybe you even already talked about this, but because Scott Gruff, who works directly with the Black Student Union, is not here, but I know you work with him and with that group as well. And I'm just wondering what kind of insights, if any, you might have. I mean, that's in terms of what, how those kids think, how they relate, what kinds of conversations have there been?
Yeah, to my knowledge, I haven't been privy to any recent conversations specifically from our students of color around this, but I think that that is a perspective in this conversation that we're missing.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's an important one.
Yeah, absolutely. And including our parents of students of color as well. I think that would behoove us to engage with, for sure.
Any more questions or concerns? All right, hearing none. So Dan, what we will do, we'll have what do we do next from this, on this SRO agreement?
Yeah, so I will have a written agreement for the board to consider. And the plan was to come back to our next regular meeting on August 12th. Obviously, a lot has been, discussed tonight. And so I have to give that some thought as well about how to approach that. But it'll certainly come back to the board again for consideration.
Okay. Thanks, Dan.
And lastly, just because I'm not sure how to, Danielle put some links up here, but did you say you were going to email this to us too? Just in case I lose them from this meeting. I just tried to copy them and I messed it up and didn't copy it right. So okay, thank you. That'd be great.
Okay. We're going to go ahead and move to policy revisions, first reading. And Susan Manning, you said we have 45 of them.
Yeah, and you guys have to read all of them. Sorry.
Why?
You have to do all the research and check every single statute. That's what, again, this is the policy committee right now is a really good team because you have Susan's experience and Elizabeth brings all kinds of stuff and she gives us all kinds of articles. And then I check the law,
And she maintains her humor throughout, which is
what I do. I push the research and I laugh. Those are my two superpowers.
Very helpful.
And we haven't been able to have donuts or coffee either. It's a pretty amazing group that's willing to do this work.
Nice.
Effectively, I would say that probably 80+% of the changes are due to statutory changes or recommendations based on statutory changes. Some of them are required, some of them are not required, but based on the statutory language, it's recommended. And we do check the statutes. We worked on some policies because of the possible COVID issues, and we're continuing to look at those. As I say, we've already met 3 times on the other policies, and we'll continue to look at the COVID pieces.
Susan. Susan, you're on mute.
I was doing so well. The one question I had was that, we had a lot of conversation about the student anti-harassment one with the new OCR wording and stuff. Did you hear back from Mike Jolka on that, or?
I did. I forwarded to him. He's we had a little bit of a back and forth, but I have not gotten to his final
Okay.
recommendation yet.
Okay.
So
So hopefully by then, well, he will be by next
for sure
time.
by then.
He will. Okay.
Yeah, but
Otherwise,
that's not,
yeah, there aren't a lot of real exciting changes in most of this, but
and anything we had a question on, we're holding for review.
right.
I mean, or we held for review and had Dan do further research. Like he went to Krista, or he went to the school nurses, or, you know, he went to Jared. We've tried to check things that affect other people.
Okay. All right. Any more questions or concerns? Peter?
There's two policies that bother me. First is 0167.6. There's some the changes. Essentially, it replaces records custodian with superintendent. Is it the intention that the superintendent will always be the records custodian?
This is actually just to clarify, I'm already the records custodian by policy. I always have been.
Yeah.
And so this is just putting clarification in other policies so it's consistent.
I see. I mean,
I think
to be honest, I think it should say district records custodian, just to make it clear why we're sending things to the superintendent. And it being because you're the district records custodian. The other thing I do have, and I've raised this before, I do have a problem with this policy because it requires board members to provide the superintendent all emails, communication related to their position as member of the Board of Education. And to be honest, I don't think that that's right. That if I agree that I have to and always will follow the open records law, but if someone in the community, I'm concerned about the chilling effect of somebody in the community or a staff member wanting to reach out to a board member and say, "Hey, I'd like to talk to you about something," when we have a policy in place that says that communication has to go to the superintendent. And I don't think it's right. You know, the superintendent works for us. We don't work for the superintendent. And I don't know of any other situation where you would say, well, the employee has a right of access to the employer's, all of the employer's communication. I think that this policy, you know, should say that every board member has to comply with the public records law and maybe give some suggestions about that. But I disagree with the statement that we as a board should have to send all of our communications to the superintendent, because there may be cases where somebody reaches out to us and we don't think that that's something that needs to go directly to the superintendent, that somebody might have a reasonable expectation that they may be able to talk to us, be able to communicate with us in policy, in relative confidence, you know, even given the public records, but in the confines of the public records request.
So we made an agreement, Peter, about this, and I know that this is kind of newish for the new members, but basically we had agreed that if you had recommendations for change in a particular policy, particularly on first reading, this is a great opportunity for us as the policy committee to see your recommendations, and you would agree that they would be in writing so that we can see them and evaluate them. The other factor is you're absolutely right. The open meetings and open records should be cited here, because any personal email you get that is related to a school issue is accessible under those laws. So this, if you want this stated differently so that it's more like the statute, we can look at that. So why don't you send us some written recommendations? We'll have time between this meeting and the final reading to review those and integrate those changes if that's helpful for the board.
Well, this is our opportunity to discuss these issues, and I'd like to get get the feeling, get the understanding of the rest of the board. I'd like to hear what they have, if they have any comments about.
That's right. But if you'd like, generally we ask you to bring those in writing so everybody can see it. That what you're giving us.
I'll submit it in writing before our next meeting if that'll make you happy. Will that make you happy? Okay.
Susan Fox.
Well, yeah, and I think the intent. I mean, I kind of, when you read it through your lens, Peter, I
Yeah.
kind of see why it irritates you.
Yeah.
Because it sounds like we're literally sending him every email, and that's not really what it means. It really means it has to be kept on our server, so he can access it if somebody makes a request as the records custodian. And actually, Dan doesn't even do it then. He has his IT people go through, and because the one time we had a request, I know a couple of years ago, or a few years ago, our IT people had to spend a lot of hours going through a whole bunch of emails and found maybe 2 that were totally innocuous that they were looking for. So it's just that there has to be a record, and that's really what it means, is shall be provided, in the sense that it's got to be on the school server. So part of the intent, I believe, is to make it real clear that if you get something school related on your personal email, that you forward it to yourself on your school email, so it's just there by record. I mean, I think that's really all it means, is but you're right, the way it's worded is
I understand what you're saying, but there isn't a requirement. There's no requirement under law that it be sent to the school district or be maintained on their servers.
Well,
Hang on, I can maintain, Susan, I can maintain, so long as I comply with the open records law, which I do, I can maintain it on my own server. And if there's an open records request, that open records request can come to me, and Dan can forward it to me, and I am forced to comply with it. There's no requirement under law that that the school have a copy of that.
That's true. I think to me, it's more protective of you as a board member, because otherwise you got to turn your computer over and have people go through it and find the emails.
No.
This way, if it's, I mean, it could amount to that. I mean, it's just a way to protect yourself and not worry that you're going to inadvertently delete something that you shouldn't delete. That's the point.
I'm prepared to take personal liability, and so should any other board members. If you want to send them to the superintendent, you're welcome to. And I do all of my business effectively on my school email, so that's not an issue. I'm just saying this policy should be in compliance with the law, but we should have the option to have conversations that do not immediately get sent to the superintendent. And I believe that this policy has a chilling effect. And I'd like to, and I'm happy to suggest language.
All I'm saying, Peter, is that's not the intent of the policy. So if that's your issue, it would be helpful if you'd write it up differently. I don't think there's anything that's going to be served by us getting into an argument about this tonight. You just need to think about how you think it could be said better, because to me, that is not what it says. That's not what it means, but I get how you could read it that way. I mean, I don't, my practice has always been, if people are critical of something with the board, or I think it's something I think Dan needs to know, sometimes I just copy the content of the email and send it to him, because I want him to know about it. If I don't necessarily want to tell him who sent it. Meanwhile, it's on the school server. So if somebody made a public records request, stuff would come, whatever. But there's not, I can't even think of anything that would have mattered that much. But I just think, for me, it's way easier whenever anybody sends me anything, which happens rarely, but they send it to my personal email. I always send it to the school email, just so when I respond to them, it's coming from the school email. I don't send it all to Dan. I mean, a lot of it he wouldn't want to see. He gets too many emails already. So that is not the intent of this. So back to, if you can think of a better way to word it, go for it. But do it soon so we can have to think about it.
Absolutely. And I do that too. If somebody sends me something, normally I send it to my board email and respond from there, and then it's taken care of, no problem. But I do have an issue. The other problem with this is it says email. It should say all electronic communication. That's the other problem with the policy.
So Peter, just go ahead and write that up and submit it to the policy committee.
Sure.
Sounds cool.
We'll come back to it. All right. Any other?
One more, which was, sorry, I got to get to my notes, which was 9130 public requests. Board shall respond in writing is changed to board may respond in writing. I don't support that. I believe that if someone goes through that process to that point, the board owes them a written explanation, written response. And so I would support the change of that language from shall to may. Anyone else?
I thought it was we agreed on shall last year.
Yeah,
I think we did.
Why this is a Neola change, and I don't remember why we.
Because there was a certain incident that happened, and it was at may, and then we changed it to shall. Now we want to change it back to may? I don't.
And I remember talking in the meeting about, I think we would always do it, so I don't know why we made the change either. So if anybody remembers.
Yeah, remember, I liked shall.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And Peter, I
put a
think it
note
was
on that.
you.
Put a
Peter,
note
it
on
was you that made the change. You
Not
wanted
to
to
May.
change.
Not to May. Not me. Not to May.
All right, well, we're gonna have to look that
This is
over.
regarding, this is not a curriculum issue. This is regarding a staff member, but yeah, I would think you'd still write a written response. I don't remember why we changed it.
I agree. I haven't circled with a big, huge question mark next to it. So
We have to
clearly I
look
didn't
at
like
that.
it either.
Okay, all right, so Susie,
just
man, you
checking
got that down too, okay.
That one you can do.
All right.
I'll write up language for the other one.
Yeah.
Open records law compliance can be tricky, and so I think actually what the that policy should do, and I'll try and write a few things in there. The policy should probably explain a few things that people could do, board members could do to stay compliant with open records policy. For example, give the example of forwarding all your correspondence to your board email. If you do that, then you're compliant. But
That'd be a good approach.
yeah.
All righty. Okay, any more? All right. Yeah, now I guess we can go ahead and move on.
See what this looks like, you guys?
Hmm.
Oh, actually, I do want to make one comment, which is 5630, which is corporal punishment, use of force. It seemed to me that that was inconsistent with the SRO's job and ability and the things to do things in schools. And I think that that should be evaluated from how does this apply to the SRO, because the policy does say any agent of the school district. And I believe because he's under contract, he's an agent of the school district. And we want to make sure that there's that policy aligns with what our expectations for the SRO are.
Okay.
That's 5630. Right. Yeah. Yeah. I looks to me like it does, but yeah, I'd look at it again.
Yeah.
Okay. All righty. All right, we're gonna move on to school renovations construction update.
Okay, so the latest executive summary is attached. I just accidentally closed out my board docs. Excuse me, just 1 minute. Okay, so on there, as far as the new school, at this point, everything's on schedule. I think the report, speaks for itself. With regard to the renovations, Glacial Drumlin is moving along well. You might remember Glacial Drumlin is the one we're on the tightest timeline on. And so far so good there with that work. And then the Winneco we reported on last time, with the major issue with the water, and everything is moving forward. So I guess any questions on any of those projects?
Wait,
Nice to see
Dan,
them
do
so
we have
far
a
along.
plan? Do we have a plan for those guys to do a presentation? Because some of this, I mean, again, I'm sorry, I don't know what an area C slab on grade 4 means. So are they going to come and just do an update for us?
Well, there are pictures. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Oh, so you know what a grade C?
No, I have no idea, but I'm just looking at the pictures. I'm thinking
You should,
like
you
stuff's happening.
should drive by and check it out. It's looking.
Yeah,
it's
I
really,
do. Actually, I do.
It's really looking good.
On my way.
Yeah,
but
yeah. Well, Winnequa too. Yeah,
I'm just asking about
Sure.
when we're going to see them next to give us an update.
Okay, there are no scheduled presentations, but I can answer that question. So if you recall, the new school has 3 sections. And so one is A, one's B, one's C. And so if you look at the picture of the concrete slab, the floor, basically, okay, that is the on-grade pour. So that's a huge piece to get that slab poured for each of those areas. Once that slab is poured, then the walls can go up and so on. And so again, the that's the third area that was scheduled to, be happening next week.
Oh, this lab reminds me of something. Where's the nearest dry cleaners?
Hopefully nowhere near there.
Hopefully nowhere near there.
Nowhere near. We don't need that again.
Right. Okay, we'll move on to future meeting dates. Things posted. Let's see here.
Yeah, and I'll update the times. There's actually not a change. We'll have our normal 7 o'clock time on those 2 regular board meetings.
Right. We'll go right back to regular.
Yeah.
Did we need to set up yet another meeting? Didn't we say something earlier in this meeting about setting up another one for some reason?
Well, as far as our school reopening planning, I guess I'd like to hold off until we have a more clear timeline.
Right.
Right. Okay.
But we won't wait long to get a date on your calendar.
Okay.
That wasn't it though. We were talking in our closed session about needing additional time to continue the discussion from our closed session.
Right. Yeah, we did talk about.
Is that what you're talking about, Susan?
Yeah, I think that might have been another closed session.
That'd be the 27th.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Yeah.
So we're adding that to the 27th meeting?
Because that's the.
We wouldn't have to change the time for that. We could just do it first and then do the eval, right?
Yeah, I think we were just talking about adding it to the agenda, right?
Right. Right. Because that's all closed session anyway, so.
Yeah.
Okay, so a discussion that you guys just took an hour for and you really needed 2 hours for, you're going to tack on to the 27th. The other night, we just got 9 additional artifacts for the evaluation. We're going to have a full discussion about that. It is now 11:45. We've been sitting here since 6 o'clock. Do we really want to put this on top of this? If you do, that's fine. I just want to make sure you want to do that.
Maybe we should discuss it for a while and figure it out.
You do what? I missed that.
Eric wants to have more discussion.
Okay. Oh.
Well, and the thing is, we're way behind on the superintendent.
Well, let's just hold that discussion to, I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure. You guys decide. Whatever. I'll go with whatever.
Yeah.
All right. Can I have a motion for adjournment?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, roll call vote.
Aye.
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 Aye. Ayes have it.
7 ayes. All right. Well, thank you.
Motion carries.
Good night, everybody.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Night.